everybody. Today we are debating the origin of species, and we are starting right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for another epic debate, as this is going to be a lot of fun, folks. We have two very experienced debaters. They've been here many a times, and this is their third debate, the endgame debate, the best two of three. It's going to be a lot of fun, folks, so we are really excited about that, and want to let you know, if it's your first time here, consider hitting that subscribe button, as we have a lot more debates coming up. So, for example, you'll see at the bottom right of your screen, this Friday, Jonathan Sheffield and Matt Dillahunty will debate whether or not the Gospels were actually authored by Jesus' own disciples. So that should be a lot of fun this Friday night. We hope to see you there, folks. And also want to let you know, though, for our guests today, I put both of their links in the description. So that way, if you're listening and you're like, I like that, you can hear plenty more by clicking on those links in that description box below. Also, what we're going to do is have a kind of a formal but mostly informal type of format tonight. It's mixed, where it'll start with 7-minute openings, followed by open discussion for about 50 minutes, and then Q&A. Of course, that would be right after the 3-minute closings that each of them will have. For the Q&A, if you have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat. And if you tag me with @ModernDayDebate, it makes it easier for me to make sure I get every question in the list. Also, Super Chat is an option, in which case you would not only have the option of asking a question during the Q&A, but also making a comment toward one of the speakers. Perhaps you want to make fun of Standing for Truth's appearance, if you've ever seen him in real life. Anything you want, folks. So we do ask, though, for real. Okay, I can tease him, but it's okay. But we do ask that you can lightly tease him. That's all right. But you be your friendly, regular selves. So with that, want to let you know, we are going to jump right into this. So thank you both very much for being here. It's honestly a pleasure to have both of you here. Thank you for coming back to spend time with us.
It's always a pleasure to be here, James. You know that. I love our formal, informal discussions over here on Modern Day Debate TM.
You got it.
I concur with that, James. It's always a blast. So thanks for giving me the opportunity today, as usual, to discuss this topic with Erika. Erika, thanks for doing it.
Hey, same at you, Standing. You know I love our chats.
Absolutely. So with that, we'll kick it over to Erika. Thanks so much. The floor is all yours, Erika.
All right, let me share my screen. This is always kind of an ordeal, huh? All right, let's see. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Not yet. Give me 1 second. I just realized it got reset. So it'll take literally about a minute. So if you
I can see it, yes.
I just have to
Okay.
go into OBS and you'll be ready to go. Don't worry, I haven't started the timer yet. It's all right. Okay, so
You just give me the thumbs up when we're ready to go.
Will do.
James, are you, for some reason on my end, James, what you just said there, I couldn't hear anything.
Yeah, you're a little muffled.
You're like really silent.
I know why. That'll go away in a second.
Okay. Well, maybe that is because of the screen share. I don't know.
Not to worry.
Oh God, the screen share's so powerful. Takes away the voice.
This will be ready in 3, 2, 1, and they can see your screen right now.
Okay, excellent. Then I'm going to go ahead and begin. So, on the origin of species, evolution by natural selection. This is my little title card. I hope you guys like it. So, understanding our world, what does that mean? Well, it's all about parsimony. So, every relevant field supports the origin of life having occurred around 4.5 to 4.8 billion years ago, and evolution by natural selection being responsible for modern biodiversity. This is supported by morphology, paleontology, genetics, statistics, physics, geology, chemistry, and those are some of our more heavy hitters in that aspect. So I figured, my case, the case I'm making for you today is precisely that life began some 4.5 to 4.8 billion years ago, and that since that point, it's been evolving and changing. So I figured we're going to start with the abiotic stuff and maybe make some comparisons along the way. So, first of all, evolution obviously requires time. A very ancient world is necessary for evolution. In fact, the theory was conceived after the Earth was discovered to be quite old. Darwin had the Principia of Geology with him on the Beagle, rather. So, how do we know that our world is 4.5, 4.8 billion years old, and how solid is that science? Well, first we have to ask a question, or rather make a comparison. So, young Earth creationism requires that the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, and evolution requires lots of time. The molecular clock suggests around 4.1 billion years. So, radiometric dating, this is solid as a rock, and it's essentially rooted in a firm law of physics. So, this is the radioactive decay law. Basically, when we're dating rock, we just look at a ratio. It's a simple ratio between the parent nucleus and the daughter nucleus, and depending on which one you have more of, you can get a general idea of the age of the rock because things decay consistently. They don't change in meaningful ways in nature on our planet. So a bunch of creationists back in 2005 and a little bit earlier decided that they were going to disprove radiometric dating, and they couldn't. They had to admit that a young Earth position cannot be reconciled with the scientific data without assuming that exotic solutions will be discovered in the future. No known thermodynamic process could account for the required rate of heat removal, nor is there any known way to protect organisms from radiation damage. So this is the radioactive decay law to the left, and to the right, I've got this classic. You guys have probably all seen this before. I've talked about it here before, of what would happen if we tried to compress or cram in 4.8 billion years of radioactive decay into about 6,000 years, and it would be a bad situation. According to the equation, basically at the time of Adam and Eve 6,000 years ago, the Earth would be around 70,000 degrees Celsius for every square kilometer. So you can check that. There's a little source at the bottom there. But also, $257 billion depend on the fact of radiometric dating working. Here's a paper from the University of Durham. It essentially talks about how chronometers are very reliable and precise. They can tell you the depositional age, oil generation, things of this nature that require the geologic column and, of course, evolutionary theory. Both of them corroborate one another to be factual. So I very much doubt that this is usually what I point to when people, sort of point to conspiracy as something that's keeping young, YEC down, which is that it's a lot of money to be rooted in something that isn't certain. So, young Earth creationism requires a separate ancestry for the kinds of animals, and evolution requires a universal common ancestry. We can look to statistics for this one. I've also shown this here before. These are two excellent papers that basically just do statistical analyses on common ancestry versus separate ancestry. And these quotes to the right are very powerful. The first one says, quote, "We overwhelmingly rejected both species and family separate ancestry due to infinitesimally small p-values. Many of the data sets reject species separate ancestry strongly. Essentially, the odds of getting this data set and having separate ancestry be the reality is it's about the odds of picking a specific atom in the known universe, which is to say very small. And under the second one, we have that we demonstrate rather quantitatively, as predicted by evolutionary theory, sequences of homologous proteins from different species that converge as we go further and further back in time. And at the bottom, it says it's time that researchers insisted that doubters put up testable alternatives to evolution. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about nested hierarchies today because no standing has a response to that, and I hope we can get into that later. So, young Earth creationism also requires that humans are somehow unique from the animals, including the apes. And of course, evolution requires that humans are animals and descend from an ancient hominoid. So we know that we're apes. We know that we're animals. We know this by our morphology because every category that we use, or rather the criteria that we use for various categories to cram other animals into them, we match all of the ones that land us as catarrhines, that land us as hominids, et cetera, et cetera. But we can also, of course, look to genetics. I use this slide every time because I think it's so important. When we align genomes side by side between humans and bonobos or chimpanzees, we find they're 96% similar with whole genome, or around 99 for coding base pairs. And interestingly enough, when you compare a chimp to a human and also to a gorilla, they're more closely related to us. The way that we do this is through comparative genomics, which is basically a souped up version of a paternity test. So, young Earth creationism typically requires that no transitional forms exist that bridge the gaps of major groups, whereas evolution requires lots of transitional forms, particularly bridging those major groups. I know we're probably going to be talking about this as well, as it does have to do with that nested hierarchy. But to be clear, obviously, there are transitional forms. Evolution makes a prediction. Basically, can we show a gradient from more basal ancestors to more modern ancestors through geologic time? And the answer is, of course, that we can. Oops, that's in the wrong place. Here are a couple of skulls, right? I show this one every time as well because it's also very powerful. All of these skulls are found in, generally different geologic layers, and you'll notice that they have small morphologic differences, which of course exist through geologic time, and that geologic time is backed up by the radiometric decay law, rather. And we do the classic comparison of humans and how Australopithecus africanus and afarensis are indeed very intermediate in both their knees, their parabolic palates, their inline big toes, their pelvises, their foramen magnum, etc., etc. But we can look to the tetrapods, and what do we see? We see morphologic change through geologic time. We see the emergence of pectoral muscles, the nostrils moving to the top of the head. We can see it with whales. Modern cetaceans are the only organisms that have an inner ear structure known as the involucrum, and the only terrestrial animals we find it in the fossil record are very coastal organisms that through geologic time in the same location slowly become more aquatic. They get shorter, more awkward limbs. Their nostrils move to the top of their head. And yet still, when we look at animals like Dorudon, which is, markedly a cetacean, a whale, we still see that it has a little bitty pelvis, little bitty knees, and little bitty feet. So, evolution, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because of the nature of natural selection, much of the genome in any given organism is non functional and littered with the remains of ancient viruses accidentally preserved within the genotype. So, life is chock full of these redundancies and mistakes. And a classic example would be the gulo gene or our vitamin C gene, which is broken in all of the haplorines. We can talk about endogenous retroviruses, and to jump back to this slide right here, because young Earth creationism suggests that the human genome is at least close to 100% functional, whereas evolution suggests that lots of junk DNA and other elements indicative of retrofitted genomes exist. And one of those, of course, is endogenous retroviruses. I know we're going to be talking about this. These are little bitty ancient bits of DNA lodged in our genomes. Now, we know for certain that they are indeed viruses, because when you transplant them, in at least in their whole form, from one animal to another, you get a zoonotic effect. They become pathogenic. So these are some papers where we can talk about that later. I'm sure we will. We could talk about how we share 99% of our ERVs with chimps in the same exact location, and the mutations are all the same as well. Or we could talk about the functionality of the human genome, or indeed any animal's genome, none of which are fully functional. They've done knockout tests on mice, hitting out half of the entire genome, and still they're able to reproduce and have normal mice babies, et cetera, et cetera. This paper in 2017 puts a cap on human functionality at around 25%. Oh, I look at this. I screwed up all my slides. They're all mixed up. But here's some birds here in transitional forms that are also quite neat. So to finish, this is what I've got to say. Here's some listed facts and their implications. Radiometric dating exists and confirms an ancient Earth. Statistics make separate creation very unlikely. Morphology, genetics, and paleontology confirm that humans are animals, apes, and not physiologically unique in any major way. Behavior is, of course, a different story. Most of the genome is junk, and transitional species exist and bridge gaps. Thus, young Earth creationism is entirely unsupported in at least what we've talked about specifically here, and evolutionary theory is entirely supported. So that's all I got. Yes.
And then, and I didn't want to interrupt or anything. My timer did say just over 9 minutes, so I'll put, which is fine. I always say take your time.
Oh, I wish you guys would have stopped me.
No,
Okay.
You know what? You were on a roll. We didn't want to stop you, but I'll do 9 minutes as well on my timer. I'm saying I'll need all that, but I'll just.
I did lose track of time. Sorry about that. And to be fair to our dearest friend, Standing for Truth, I do have to mention really quick. And Standing is that. Let's see, that must be your PowerPoint. Okay, so
Yes.
you're already showing, but I do want to mention, just so people know, that Dearest Standing for Truth is not moving the goalposts. The subtitle for tonight's debate, but I told him, I said, Standing, that's just not going to work. Because he was like, let's do this totally long title, man. And I was like, we're just going to keep it Origin of Species. But the subtitle, admittedly, is Limited Ancestry versus Universal Ancestry. So with that, the floor is all yours, Standing for Truth.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much. Give me 1 second here just to make sure everything is good. I'll start my timer in 3, 2, 1. Okay, awesome. Thanks for doing this, Erika. Thanks so much for that opening. You know what? The molecular clock she talked about is the direct way to test for age. And contrary to what she said in her opening, molecular clocks go back just 6,000 years and not millions and billions of years like she insisted. She looked at dating methods, of course, and went over a number of things indicating old age. Of course, we're going to stick with that, which is direct evidence. For example, genetics. That's what's inherited, sperm and egg. But briefly, I do want to touch on the dating methods that she talked about there, including isochron dating. Even that relies on at least one or more unknowable assumptions. Some of these assumptions being about initial conditions, constancy of rate, for example, and a closed system. And even isochron dating will require an assumed history. That's pretty obvious. What she said about rate project not having any explanations or evidence, that's not true either. For example, a number of lines of evidence do indicate that rapid decay has occurred in the past. For example, byproducts of radioactive decay include helium, fission tracks, and radio halos. This is observable evidence in the rocks that nuclear decay has occurred. She looked to fossils quite a bit there, but fossils cannot establish genetic relationships. Similarities in fossil organisms, for example, may not always be due to common ancestry. So I just wanted to touch on a few things there. As you can see here, Debate with Erika, Chapter 3. I enjoyed the first two, so I'm looking forward to this one. Tonight we are debating the origin of species, universal or limited ancestry, as James reiterated there. In Erika's previous debates, including the two with me, she focused heavily on genetic related evidence to demonstrate universal common ancestry, genomic comparisons, chromosome 2 fusion, for example, endogenous retroviruses, which she touched on there, pseudogenes, for example. So I'm happy to discuss any of those. I have no problem with this, as it is in our DNA where the question regarding ancestry is answered. What directly records a species' ancestry? Sperm and egg do not pass on a fossil or a bone. They do not pass on geography or a rock. They pass on genetics and traits. And so if we want to find out the history of humanity and the origin of species, this is where we must look. We can look at dogs as a basic example as to why genetics is so important in determining what is related and what is not related. Dogs of all types make it clear that morphology, anatomy, and bones in the dirt can oftentimes fail us because there is often more diversity within a species than between a species. This makes it difficult to classify animals by their physical traits alone. Therefore, the best way to determine ancestry is by looking at the genetics and that which is passed on sperm and egg. This is the only direct measurement of ancestry. And she talked about, or she showed a couple papers there based on statistics that limited ancestry can't be true, but those studies are all based on the assumption that creationists don't predict nested hierarchical patterns, and those studies have never been done based on a starting point of created heterozygosity. So that negates all those studies. Creationists and evolutionists have vastly different explanations for the origin of genetic diversity. I will only briefly touch on the created genetic diversity hypothesis, and will do so by asking, would God have created Adam and Eve with two identical versions of DNA, and Eve the same way? If this were the way God chose to do things, Adam and Eve would have created clones. God said, be fruitful and multiply, not be fruitful and clone yourselves. What makes the most sense, both scientifically and theologically, is that God created DNA differences from the start. This is the idea of created heterozygosity. Adam and Eve would have had within their DNA the genetic potential to produce every shade of skin that exists on the planet or known to man. If these studies she talked about had the assumption that both models predict nested hierarchical patterns, they wouldn't have come to the conclusions that they did. Evolutionists explain the vast majority of DNA differences as a result of mutation, and this is the way that they look at it. This one genetic difference and starting point leads to vastly different expectations and predictions on DNA function and speciation. Every single one of Erika's genetic related evidence for universal common ancestry that she pointed to in her opening here have been overturned, and I'm happy to discuss every single one of them. The lines of evidence Erika uses are evidence for this model of created heterozygosity. I'm glad she brought them up. Since both creationists and evolutionists expect nested hierarchical patterns in anatomy, physiology, and genetics, and we both expect homologous patterns, and we both expect types of creatures that can best be explained as mosaic or, in a sense, transitional, I can demonstrate that the function of DNA can differentiate between the two models. Pseudogenes are functional DNA elements and not mistakes. ERVs that she pointed to here are functional DNA elements and not the remnants of ancient viral infections. And the chromosome 2 fusion has been overturned for a number of reasons that I will discuss here with Erika. She also talked about the gulo pseudogene, which can be explained based on mutational hotspots, which is what evolutionists look to explain some of the data as well. So here are some papers. A lot of evolutionists, even Erika, will say it's just a few functional, retroviruses or retrotransposons, but we can see paper after paper, retroviral promoters in the human genome, large-scale discovery of insertion hotspots and preferential integration sites of human transposed elements, regulatory activities of transposable elements from conflicts to benefits. So intronic ALUs influence alternative splicing. I mean, you can find paper after paper after paper. So nested hierarchies, of course, are the products of design, and humans build in homologous patterns. So here are the questions I have for Erika. I want her to begin the discussion by answering these questions regarding the chromosome 2 fusion. This is extremely important. As you can see here on the slide, Kenneth Miller has said that if we do not find evidence for a chromosome 2 fusion in humans, then evolution is wrong. And we do not share a common ancestor with the chimpanzee. So if there was no chromosome 2 fusion, well, as per the title of the debate, looks like limited ancestry is what we see empirically. So therefore, the discussion must start by Erika answering these very critical questions and simply not ignoring them. These are the questions I have asked of her in our first debate. And from my recollection, I received no answer. So we know the fusion site is a functional element inside an RNA helicase long non-coding RNA gene. Erika has issues with this, but this is the least of her problems. Why is the telomeric region so degenerate and small? Where do we find the necessary disabled second centromere, the cryptic centromere? And most importantly, chimps have very distinctive and exceptionally large satellite sequences at the ends of their chromosomes. Where are these large ape-specific satellite sequences in the reputed fusion site? You have my permission, of course, to take your time answering these extremely critical questions uninterrupted when we start the discussion. Since your theory hinges on the fusion event being true, then you should obviously know how to answer these questions. Another question I'll have for Erika is, we know that ERVs, which she touched on in her opening, are in other classes of retrotransposons, accomplish many crucial functions in regulating gene expression, differentiation, development, and even cell stress responses. Does Erika have any real empirical evidence, maybe even a technical paper, that actually demonstrates a non-functional DNA element that she points to, such as an ERV, a pseudogene, an ALU, for example, going from non-functional to something critically functional in the genome? And I do not want her to simply invoke co-option with no real empirical evidence. I have just over a minute here. I'll go over a couple other questions. Human chromosomes, for example, are made up of relatively large linkage blocks. And analyses of these original text strings tells us that the genome is young. Why? Because the genome has only been partially scrambled. Crossovers and gene conversions should scramble all linkage blocks quite quickly in an evolutionary time frame. This is a big problem for evolutionary theory. How does Erika explain this? A near fully functional genome turns these nested hierarchies into design hierarchies. Therefore, Erika has to fight the evidence, as you've seen in the opening, for genome function, including the results of ENCODE, which suggests that over 80% of our genome is indeed functional. We can discuss the Grar paper that she uses in the discussion portion if she'd like. But my question would be, if less than 25% of the genome really is functional, as Erika suggests, why would the cell bother with it? Why would the cell bother with so much junk? Such an activity would be wasteful of energy and resources and would have been eliminated by natural selection long ago.
Set. Thanks so much for that, Standing for Truth. Now jump right into the open discussion. So thanks so much, and the floor is all yours.
Oh, wow. We do have a lot to discuss. I'm excited. I want to touch a bit on, before we begin, as we tend to touch on this topic. One, I would like to see a source for saying that molecular clocks don't go back further than 6,000 years.
Sure,
I would be interested to see that. I suspect it's Nathaniel Jeanson, which
we'll talk about that for sure.
I'm sure we will get into Nathaniel Jeanson. I also wanted to ask what unassumed conditions
Well,
your
actually, real
proposal.
quick, because you did bring up Nathaniel Jensen there, why don't you explain why you believe Dr. Nathaniel Jensen is in error regarding his regarding the mutation rates that he has derived and used to show that mitochondrial Eve goes back just 6,000 years and Y chromosome Adam actually goes back just 4,500 years to Y chromosome Noah. And I just want to point out, we can talk about the decay rates. I do believe because of the title of the debate, it's detrimental that you do address the questions regarding the chromosomal 2 fusion.
Yes,
As
I agree. Although I will, a couple of things there. One, I do agree, but as for instance, Kent Hovind has always pointed out, evolution does require a lot of time, and I find that given it does quite frequently in these conversations boil down to how old the Earth is, because created heterozygosity is quite strange if you really are working with a sort of progressive creation in a 4.5 to 4.8 billion year old Earth, which is why I bring it up, because I find it to be very glaring for creationism as a whole. And that's why I would like to discuss that sort of
if I could just add something in real
here.
quick, evolutionists will say that time is the hero of the plot, so that's why you'll look to the dating methods, for example, and isochron dating. But to be honest with you, time is actually the enemy of the plot, because we see that genetic change is down. For example, we can see direct evidence in our molecular clocks that only take us back max 6,000 years. So before we get to that, let's discuss you're the one who brought up Dr. Nathaniel Jensen. So what do you believe about Dr. Jensen's mutation rates, which I'm saying directly prove a young genome of 6,000 years? What do you believe he
I
is in
think
error on?
I think
You
we
brought
can
it up
tie.
first.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, if we were doing it in order, I think that normally, since it's a back and forth, it would be sort of we address my question first and then move on. But I think I found a decent way to tie this in, because if I remember correctly from Nathaniel Jensen's book Replacing Darwin, one of the reasons why he invokes the mutation rate that he invokes, that is to say, a constant one, completely ignoring time dependency slowdown or the hominid slowdown hypothesis, is because, and this is almost, this is paraphrased, but this is verbatim the concept, is because he says that since evolutionists can invoke constancies, right, in the speed of light and in radiometric decay, he should be allowed to do the same thing for mutation, which of course those three concepts are completely divorced from one another. Natural selection, or any kind of selection, doesn't work on inanimate objects that don't
Well, do
reproduce.
you have predictions on natural selection and how much natural selection would have to remove? Because universally, mitochondrial DNA clocks and the Y chromosome mutate fast. They mutate quickly. Evolutionists, there's no mutation rate that can be slow enough for evolution in 250,000 year ago for let's say Y or mitochondrial E, Y chromosome Adam. There's no the mutation rate that's slow enough to account for that. But we just use the empirical method, and that's why Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, in I guess as an objection to what you're saying, he has made testable predictions on the rate at which mitochondrial DNA changes in non-African people groups, for example, the Khoisan peoples. Do you have a prediction as to how fast the mitochondrial DNA would mutate or change in people groups not measured yet?
Well, I'm
Because if not,
certainly,
then it's not science.
yeah, I'll be the first one to admit that I'm not a geneticist. I have no idea the
Has
precise
anybody
number.
made a prediction from the evolutionist community on how fast mitochondrial DNA mutates in non-African people groups, for example, the Khoisan peoples? Because Dr. Nathaniel Jensen has pointed to non-African people groups and said, okay, as support for the mutation rate that I'm using, this is exactly what I predict these people groups will mutate.
Yes, I believe that there have been quite a few predictions on mitochondrial mutation rate. But the thing is that
Not from the
there's
evolutionist community. No, that's wrong.
well, I would find that surprising. I don't know if like what those papers would be off the top of my head, because it's so well understood in the community of genetics that mutation rates change.
How come Dr. Nathaniel Jensen's predictions are working so well? Because
Well, they're
he's,
not. They're working within his
oh,
own
they are?
framework. I mean,
Okay, so
if we go back into his if memory serves, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the one who's probably read the book more recently than I have, but if memory serves, he near the end of the book he actually ends up taking several different species, not just humans, and he's trying to figure
right.
out what the predicted mutation rate using evolutionary theory would be, and what using his particular type of very, very constant mutation would be. And I think it was either 3 or 4 out of the 7 he actually got while tweaking the mutation rate to be constant, which it's not. In fact, I have a paper, it would take me a minute to pull up because it's in my history from today, but I have a paper that shows very handily that mutation rates don't just vary through time, they vary by population. Now, not very much, mind you, but that right off the bat deep sixes Jensen's idea of using a single constant mutation rate. Now, he does tweak the
Well,
generation.
he's not using a single constant mutation rate. So he's looking at the mutation rates in humans, for example, and making direct predictions on human people groups. For example, non-African people groups, such as the Khoisan peoples.
Short and pithy, standing for truth, just so Erika can.
So non-African people groups like the Khoisan peoples, their mutation rate hasn't been measured. So he made predictions on that. If you look at various animal species.
All right, that was one point. So let's go back to Erika, since you, standing for truth, you did interrupt Erika. So I do want to.
I just don't want Erika to go on a tangent. I just want you to
I promise we'll come back to you. We'll promise we'll come back to you. We already let you, it was already generous to let you make one point while she was talking. So we'll come back to you once she finishes her point. I promise.
Take your time. I just don't want you to go on a tangent.
It's totally fun. Because I do go on tangents. I fully admit to that. I get excited with myself and I want to take these rabbit holes
me too.
to wherever I need.
We're both. I want to give you uninterrupted time just to go over why you believe his mutation rate in human people groups on the mitochondria is inaccurate. Go take your time, and then I'll give a rebuttal after. Go
yeah,
ahead.
so I'm just going to give you one very simple thing that I've just said, which is that he uses a constant mutation rate for humans. Human mutation rate is not constant. Like I said, it varies within populations as well as through time and as well as across species. So while I understand that Jensen used different mutation rates for different species, he uses a single uninterrupted mutation time to go back and get the numbers that he requires. And to kind of add on to that, the whole concept of the hominid slowdown hypothesis, right, which is that in both humans and in chimps and bonobos, mutations are occurring slower and slower, is mapped on the Y chromosome that we have been dying to talk about for so long. But the second part is that Nathaniel Jensen has made a prediction about the Khoisan people. We've been waiting for his definitive Khoisan paper results for quite some time now. And if I remember correctly, because my close YEC friend who I used to get coffee with had a copy of Replacing Darwin, we were talking about when those papers were going to come out when we used to get coffee 6 months ago, or rather 9 months ago. And he was like, it should be any day now. And here we are still with no paper, no results, nothing with regard to something definitive that matches his claim. And it just makes me wonder why, but to definitively answer your question, human mutation rates aren't constant. That's why Nathaniel Jensen's mitochondrial Eve and whole backwards span, movement backwards with to 6,000 years for Y chromosome and mitochondrial Eve is incorrect. That's all I have to say on that.
Awesome. I appreciate that. So I'll just respond by saying once Khoisan people give us their blood and their DNA, we can test that. Of course, Dr. Nathaniel Jensen is not just going to go over and do that himself, but the prediction, it's a novel prediction that's in print. So I mean, people that say, just real quick, people that say that creationists don't make future testable predictions that future observations can confirm whether they're true or not is just false. And remember, the mutation rate is constant. Yes. The only thing that is different is generational times between different animals. That's why Dr. Jensen says you can point to, say, a fox, and I will predict how quickly their DNA changes. And that's something that evolutionists are not doing. When it comes to mitochondrial Eve, for example, the papers that he has looked at, for example, the mutation rate used in, I believe it's the Parsons paper, was actually so good that it was adopted by the FBI. You might even be aware of this. And then many of the subsequent papers that he puts in his endnotes of Replacing Darwin, following the Parsons paper, right? There hasn't just been one paper, for example, have actually confirmed, they corroborate that mitochondrial Eve lived just thousands of years ago. And this even accounts for heteroplasmy, I'm sure you know what that is, and somatic mutations that people like Evograd like to complain about. So many studies have looked at the D-loop region, that's highly conserved, of course, in the mitochondrial DNA, and those are 100% germline mutations, given, of course, that they are multi-generational pedigrees. Trio studies are the best way to to determine a mutation rate. Now, I don't want to bore the audience here, but they can look this up themselves. And these studies actually line up perfectly with other studies of mitochondrial DNA. So there are mutations in this compartment of DNA, of course, that are heteroplasmic. You've probably heard of this. They'll drift to fixation, but regardless, all the dates themselves are in agreement. So unless you add in evolutionary phylogenetic assumptions or archaeology related assumptions, all the papers corroborate on one. And then take all this taken into consideration, he has actually made testable predictions about non-African people groups, which evolutionists aren't making. That hasn't been. So you can say natural selection.
This is a lot of points.
Solves this problem. But without any testable predictions, Erika, it's just not science. So go ahead.
But the thing is that what you just said there was, you made several points, but in the middle, I noticed that you said the mutation rate is constant. I can't stress this enough. It's just not. It's not in populations. It's not across species.
What's your testable prediction?
I'm not going to make a testable prediction.
Nathaniel Jensen has, so he's doing.
That's great. He's entitled to make that testable prediction. In fact, I very much commend him for making it. That's very gutsy of him to put that out there, knowing that mutation rates do vary. Now I want to make a prediction of my own here. You mentioned that a lot of his mitochondrial DNA, I imagine they were more secular papers, have been corroborated by other studies. One, I would be interested to see those studies, because my prediction is whatever studies they have to do with mutation rates that are occurring right now. The whole crux of the issue is Nathaniel Jensen gets his number of 6,000 years by taking a current mutation rate and tracking it backwards. Now, that's not how mutation works. Like I said, we see it, differences in mutation in population, species, and through time.
Of course.
So the problem with that becomes, can he provide any kind of reasoning for why he thinks that the mutation rate in humans should be constant without invoking the old, well, evolutionists do it for the speed of light, evolutionists do it for radiometric decay, which are, of course, as I know you would agree, are very different from biology. So that's my whole problem with him. I noticed that
he does account for those, because
he has one mutation rate. He uses one mutation rate to get that 6,000 years. The mitochondrial DNA human mutation rate is what he tracks backwards to get 6,000 years for mitochondrial Eve. And interestingly enough, as I know you've seen from Evograd's blog, which I do recommend that everyone check out, he goes very in depth into replacing Darwin. When Jensen's methodology was applied to chimpanzees and bonobos, the prediction that he was supposed to get using a constant mutation rate for chimps and bonobos and what their differences would be was completely off base, which proves my point. They are subject to the same hominid slowdown hypothesis that humans are subject to. So using that constant mutation rate on a species that, at least to our current knowledge and with regard to the sex chromosomes in particular, is mutating faster, you run into problems. Constancy is very much out the window when it comes to genetics, is something that I've learned, at least in the past 2 weeks of spending a lot of my time reading up on it. But again, I'm not a geneticist.
No, that's okay. That's why the mutation rates that he's using in non-African people groups are leading to testable predictions. It's now revealing genetic signatures in the mitochondrial DNA as well as the Y chromosome, once we get into that, regarding the history of civilization, which evolutionists wouldn't even expect to be there. But that's why he's looked at African diversity, for example. So there's all types of rates, there's all types of considerations that he needs to consider. Even in the Khoisan peoples, for example, in the African people groups, there's more genetic diversity. So he looks to not just explanations from the UN data on, as you know about, on when people marry, but also goes into different rates of gene conversion, different rates of chromosomal recombination, different historic population sizes. These are all factors that are considered in these predictions. It just so happens to turn out that the mutation rate derived in all these papers and using the empirical method does take mitochondrial Eve back to 6,000 years. And he can consider somatic mutations, heteroplasmy. He looks at the D loop, for example, which
yes,
germline, and it goes back 6,000 years. And he's making testable predictions, which you have admitted, based on your assumption of evolutionary deep time, that these predictions have not been made. So the creationists are the ones doing the science, and the evolutionists evolutionists are the ones that are just coming up with rescue devices is the
Well,
problem.
so to be clear though, so again, you've listed a ton of different things that Jensen has taken into consideration, all of these varying factors that he's going down his list and checking off and saying, all right, we're including this in our empiricism, except for the fact, the enormous glaring hole in the entire thing, which is that he uses a constant mutation rate for humans. That's the problem. You can include 100 million different factors, but if one of the biggies is incorrect and is incorrect on its head, then the data's out the window. It's just not viable at all. So it's great, that he has reasons for or that he uses triads rather than dyads, and he makes sure he's using his germline mutations and looking at the D loop of a single paper, mind you. But again, I cannot stress this enough, and you haven't provided anything to me here that suggests that I'm incorrect in what I'm stating. He's using a constant mutation rate. Humans don't mutate constantly, like at a constant rate, rather.
Right. And that's why no size fits all. That's why he needs to look at generational times when it comes to species. When it comes to African people groups, we need to look at population history, for example. We need to look at genetic processes such as gene conversion, recombination. But that's why he's actually made a testable prediction, not only on people groups, human people groups, but also species. And the point is that based upon the actual empirically observed mutation rate, yeah, you have to say that these mutation rates have changed throughout history, or natural selection has been faster in the past, for example, because there is no mutation rate that's slow enough for deep time evolution to be true. But the thing is, you can say those things all day, but without any testable predictions that flow from those explanations and those rescue devices, it is not science. Creationists are the ones that are making the predictions. Dr. Jensen's making predictions on non-African people groups. He's making predictions on hundreds of animal species, for example, and he's making predictions on the stamp of civilization in our genetics. And they are working so well, and evolutionists can't explain why. Evolutionists, when they do these analyses, rather than using the actual observed mutation rates, the empirical method like we're talking about here, and you just admitted it, they have been compelled to use hypothetical, and you're proving this, hypothetical mutation rates that are about 20-fold lower than what's actually observed. And then they base this based on archaeology or certain evolutionary assumptions. But guess what? No testable predictions. It's not science. That's the problem.
So, but the thing is, though, I'm again forced to repeat the fact that mutation rates vary, yes, through time, but also across species and also across populations within species. So Jensen's not taking that, to, at least to my knowledge, maybe he's done something since then. He's not taking that into account at all. And very much, yes, I will 100% say that when devising things like phylogenetic trees, mutation rates are looked at in the context of how they've slowed down through time. But keep in mind, that doesn't help Jensen's case because he's still using a single mutation rate for all humans since the dawn of time, whenever that may be. But the problem is,
Yeah,
mutation
but
rates vary from population to population and
everybody
across species.
everybody agrees that humans mutate differently, and species may mutate differently, and there's different generation times and population histories. That's why he's making a prediction on an African people group who he is saying has a different population history, because he's saying that those Khoisan peoples are mutating faster, or maybe there's faster rates of gene conversion. But let me ask this. So humans, though overall do mutate fairly consistently, that's why he's able to make these testable predictions that evolutionists are making, except for in Africa. And that's why he's got different factors at play there. But why? Let me ask this. Why, if it's so inconsistent, for example, or so different in the past, and we should look at these phylogenetic assumptions, why is the FBI using those Parsons rates in forensics? Let's say
Because the mutation rate that's occurring now is
right.
to a degree very accurate for the people that are here, particularly as I know or as I don't know this for certain, as I very much guess the FBI is doing. How they're using it, I would wager, is very dependent on the ancestry, perhaps the gender or race of the particular individual that they're working with, because there's variation in the human population. So I would need to see, I want to see, one, I want to see when Nathaniel Jensen is finally going to show us the results of this paper. I have no idea how far he is on it, if he started
He's
it.
already shown results. Yeah, I can send you those.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, please do. But the fact of the matter is, like, and now that we've covered Nathaniel Jeanson, hopefully to your satisfaction.
Well, I
um,
don't think you answered it satisfactorily because you've admitted there's been no testable predictions, which means the evolutionist explanation is not science. And yet, not only the Khoisan people prediction, he's talking about if all modern human lineages do trace back their genetic differences to ancestors who lived only a few thousand years ago in the mitochondrial DNA and in the Y chromosome, then the history of civilization must be recorded in both DNA compartments. And yet you can see a couple papers, one based on population genetic history. You can see that these genetic signatures in the Roman empires, the Mongol empires, the Americas, the Greek
Just to be
conquest, for
sure
example,
that we
these are
don't make too many
actually
points at
being
once.
revealed. But the evolutionists don't expect those because guess what? The last 4,000 years of human history would just be a tiny little blimp at the end of a needle compared to the whole history of deep time evolution. So
So
there's
I
a
do
10-part
want to
series
give
that goes over these things too. What are
Erica a
your thoughts
chance
on
to
that, Erica?
respond.
yeah,
And
so
then
so
if
so again,
Erica, just to be sure that if you want, you can ask questions regarding Standing for Truth's opening right after you give answers to those questions or objections that
yeah,
he had just
sure.
made.
No, James, I'm easy. Whatever. I mean, if Standing wants to take the conversation in whatever direction, that's fine with me. But what I do want to make sure we talk about here today is radiometric decay.
Of course.
That
And the
is
reason
something.
why, I just want to point out to the audience, the reason why is because, as you're proving here, genetics, which is the direct measurement of ancestry, goes back to just 6,000 years ago and 4,500 years ago for the Y chromosome, and testable predictions are being confirmed based on those hypotheses. So, yeah, you want to go to indirect evidence because the direct evidence is not in your favor. But of course, we can go to the indirect evidence at a time. But you even admit it with the Parsons papers because that's the empirical method. That's the observed mutation rate. Then you say, oh, it's been so different in the past, but then no testable predictions can flow from that. So I'm just saying
Right,
you
but
can
Standing,
hold
I
that
feel I
belief,
feel like you're not
but
I
it's
feel
not
like you're not
science.
hearing I feel like you're not hearing me here. I'm saying that no, I don't think Jeanson is making accurate testable predictions with regard to the human mutation rate and the origins of humanity.
He is, though.
Whether or not his technical papers are being used by the FBI or not, I know nothing about those papers, but I suspect if we went and we looked into them, they probably have, this is just my speculation, they probably have nothing to do with the origin of humanity or anything to do with the very fact that human populations change mutation rate. I would wager that what it actually has quite a bit to do with is his methodology with regard to acquiring pedigree data. Now, I don't know that for certain, but again, I want to be very clear to everyone who's listening here. Nathaniel Jeanson is not making accurate predictions because he is using a constant mutation rate for all of humanity, which, by the way, as I've said many times
That's
before.
ridiculous because African people groups are part of humanity and he's not using a
Hold on
constant
one
mutation
second.
rate for that prediction. So why are you making things up?
All right, no more points from Standing for Truth until she gets to answer this one, as well as the one that she was actually
Of
making
course.
when you
Of course.
interrupted.
Take your time.
No, sure. And Standing, you can get a bit agitated about it. That's fine. But the fact of the matter is, I can provide, like, in a quick Google search, dozens of papers that showed the technical literature for why the mutation rate varies, or we could just pull up the fact. I mean, we can play the games of authority all day long, but the fact of the matter is, a great volume, I suppose, of the predictions that have been made by evolutionary theory have come to fruition, including, mind you, the great majority of the ones that have to do with anthropology. So
Which
again,
predictions have come true? Sorry, I don't want to, because you made a claim. Which ones on mitochondrial DNA and mutation rates, for example, and genetic signatures in both mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome? Which predictions are you referring to that have
so
come true?
standing, I feel like what you're asking for here is you're asking for me to provide a prediction that evolutionary theory has
You
made
just said they've made predictions, though, on that.
using your mutation rate
You can
of
use
that
your own.
that is this constant
Okay,
when
we
the
need
G.
fewer interruptions from Standing for Truth.
No, it's fine, James. I mean, I get what he's saying.
We're having just a back and forth discussion.
Yeah, I get
These
what
Erica and I
there
both
are
are guilty of going
disproportionate
on
interruptions
tangents.
from standing for truth, and so
Hey, I
no
don't take
matter.
it personally. You know, if I can't
You
get
can
riled by,
you can interrupt me at any time as well, Erica. But I'll go uninterrupted
yeah, if
I
I
finish
can't
the points.
get riled by Nathan Thompson, I'm not going to get riled by you standing.
As
um,
long as
Okay,
it's
but
finish your thoughts.
equal, I'm fine with
no,
it.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I guess honestly, I'm not really sure what kind of predictions you would expect evolutionists to make. Like to make a clear comparison, I feel like what you're asking is quite similar in concept to when those who accept evolution say, okay, well, what would you expect from a transitional fossil? And then typically, you know, the creationist gives either an answer or they don't. So I guess I'm not sure.
Actually, can I interrupt you just for one? I just want to make
You,
one point.
well, but I want you to answer my question while you're after I let you go here. I
Well, it's
want you to
because
answer
you
my
made the
question.
claim that they're making predictions. So I just said, what predictions were those? And now you're
Yeah, but
asking
you
me.
want them with regard to mitochondrial DNA, which, considering we're using a constant mutation rate for the population that is here right now, you're asking. And I'm going to answer your question right here, right now. You are asking for a prediction on how mutation rates change on whatever the mitochondrial DNA. And
Right.
given the hominid slowdown hypothesis, even if we could make that prediction, we wouldn't know our results for hundreds, if not thousands of years because the change in mutation rate is rather slow. Now and keep in mind, this is falling in line with the hominid slowdown hypothesis, which suggests that it's getting slower exponentially. We see this in bonobos and chimps, and we see it in humans, less so with gorillas. So I'm feeling like, to be very clear, I'm feeling like the predictions that you're asking evolutionists to make couldn't come to fruition until both of us are dead. You get
And
what I'm
that's
saying?
and that happens often. I mean, Darwin himself has made those predictions. You're talking about different factors in the history of humanity or the history of other various species that have changed the mitochondrial DNA molecular clock, and it would have to be changed for this for the slower for deep time evolution. But we're just
Yes,
looking at the
and to be clear, this is very analogous to saying, why don't we see big evolutionary changes today in like, and usually people, what they want to see is the big, you know, the sexier phyla, right?
No,
Like
I know.
you're
I just wasn't really. And see, you interrupted me there, and it's okay. It's okay. It's just a back and forth dialogue because I just wanted to point out that
yeah, I'm cool with it.
I'm starting to gather. Do you not believe that Jensen is using like secular mutation rates to come up with his predictions?
No,
Because
I know he's using a singular secular rate from Soares et al. And I know for a fact that in that same paper, everyone out there go look this up. I'm saying this with emphasis because I know it for a fact. Soares et al.'s paper, the one that Jensen cites, notes that mutation rates vary. So I don't know why Jensen,
right.
being the fantastic geneticist that he is, missed that. You
No,
get what I mean,
yes, but I feel like you're not hearing me as well because I've already said, in a nutshell, he's considered heteroplasmy. He's considered somatic mutations. He's considered germline mutations. For example, there's already agreement between two mitochondrial DNA rate sets that exist. For example, the D loop, the coding region, which we know is germline, and then the second set looks at the entire mitochondrial genome. And Jensen took a look at that data, and it came out as the same as the D loop result. So these are all corroborating with each other, which has now led to predictions on non-African people groups, as well as predictions on the history of civilization regarding genetic stamps. And
Right.
you
So two things on that though. Two things on that. And now that we are both healthy in our interruption, because normally I'm not too big on it, but you know, that's we're having a passionate discussion. That's okay. So I want to hear this from you now. Are you suggesting that the paper that Jensen pulls from Soares et al. Supports the notion that there is a single mutation rate that can be used for the mitochondria?
so if the paper that you're referring to is that paper the one that's considering looking at heteroplasmy and possible
Where Jensen gets
somatic mutations?
his mitochondrial mutation rate from. It's listed in the book and then in the footnote or whatever, and then it's also listed on Evograd's site. You can pull it up and see the one I'm talking about there.
Right.
Is the one is that paper? Are you telling me right now? Because you know I really want to know for certain what you're asserting here. Are you telling me that in that Soares paper, Soares himself agrees with Jensen's conception that there is a single mitochondrial mutation rate that can be used for humanity?
That's a good question. But the thing is, you're assuming that he's only looking at one paper. I
No, I'm
already
not
said he's
assuming. I'm
looking
just
at all
asking
sets
that
of papers.
particular paper because he cites Suarez et al., which means he's citing Suarez et al. For a reason. In that paper, do you think he's honestly representing Suarez et al.? And I'm asking this because I know the answer. Do you think he's honestly representing Suarez et al. In pulling a single human mutation rate for the mitochondria from that paper? I think it's 2009. I'm not positive.
So if that's the paper, if he's actually just looking at the rate at which the mitochondrial DNA mutates per generation, then yes, that is exactly what Jensen is looking and considering. In that paper, he might conclude different, of course, mutation rates. A lot of these papers are written by secularists and evolutionists, so therefore they're looking at ways of explaining the empirical data. They'll look at
Okay,
by
so
looking
so
at
so
assumption.
then it's not corroborated by a secular source then, because if Jensen is looking at, if I want to write a paper on how big the average cow is, and I go and I look at a paper and I see that this person has this big long list of data, right, for cow sizes, and I see, look, the average cow size is 300 pounds, right, and I walk away from that, but then when someone else goes and looks at it, they see that the average size for a cow is being 300 pounds is for a single year, then you're not representing the data properly because you're only taking a piece of it. What I'm
Right.
asserting here is that Jensen is pulling a mutation rate that works for him from secular sources, and that what he's not doing is considering it in light of all of the rigorous methodology that went into not just finding that mutation rate, but all of the other mutation rates.
Right.
So
No,
that's my point. Now, may I suggest? I want you to have the last word on this. So I want
of
you to have
course.
the last word, and then I would like to move to a different topic since we've been on this one for a while.
Yes, yes, I agree. I was about to suggest that too. And you know what? This was a good back and forth. I've had fun.
Yes.
There's no animosity as
Oh
well.
no, standing, please. Come on. I get
So
passionate. I don't
mutually
get mad.
agreement. No, it's because I think we're both the same. We like to address every single point. So I would just say that there is agreement in all these different mitochondrial rate sets that he's looking. I know that he looked. He considered I believe it was the Mark Stone King's lab 2016 mutation rate, where it looked at the human mitochondrial. I believe it was the germline transmission bottleneck, and that can be used. So he'll use these as indirect measurements of mutation rates, and then he'll consider heteroplasmy, and then find a similar mutation rate as well. But my last word on that would be, like, with the mitochondrial DNA and even with the Y chromosome, which we know that mutates faster, there's only a few mutations that separate the mitochondrial DNA differences from the mitochondrial leaf sequence. And there's only about 300 DNA differences that separate the Y chromosome from the Y chromosome atom sequence. So with the Y chromosome, you just need a faster mutation rate, and boom, there you go. And with the mitochondrial DNA, there's only a few that are separating the Eve sequence anyways. So it seems more consistent with our model, but of course I understand what you're saying. If you want to say something to that as well, you can, and then we can go to the question you had.
Yeah, I just have a problem with the constant mutation rate. That's the long and short of my problem with Nathaniel Jensen as a whole. Yes, I do like to harp on his weird method of getting the African generation time, but I don't. That's not my biggie. So I would like to ask you a question. I want to dig into heterozygosity a little bit, and I want to dig into your statement from your presentation where you say that both camps, both young Earth creationists and evolutionists, both predict nested hierarchies, because to my understanding that is completely retrofitted in mostly in Jensen's work, but I've heard other creationists say it too. But the idea that nested hierarchies are something that is predicted by creationism, to me, is a wash. I've never seen a source older than like 2015 that does so. So why do you feel that you can say that both camps predict that, when what it seems like what's happened is that there's such a wealth of transitional forms now that creationists now have to say, well, okay, there are some, but we predict that too. So take that away. Let's run with that.
So do you have two separate questions, like why would we predict mosaics, and also why would we predict nested hierarchies?
No, I'm saying, do you have any evidence that anyone did predict that?
So with what Jensen's saying in his book, I mean, a lot of this would just be, I think, nested hierarchical patterns have probably been known since Darwin's day. So a lot of this is retrodictions. But our prediction is based on the design model. If God designed life, and you've heard this before, I guess for the audience sake, what would we predict and assume he did? Well, if he created us in his image, of course, then we can get a sense for how he may have designed the biological world based on the way we design things. And we can see that nested hierarchies in DNA as well, on a mitochondrial level, nuclear DNA level, even. You can see just based on modes of transportation, you can see that they all fall within nested hierarchical patterns. And I think it's just common sense that from both models, we'd expect more similarities in a human and a chimp in DNA, in morphology, in anatomy and physiology than we would with a human and a fish, for example. So those groups within groups patterns, for the most part, would be expected on both sides. Now, there are inconsistencies, of course, that we can look to, just like you could probably point out inconsistencies in the design modes of transportation hierarchy, but that's why there's convergent evolution, incomplete lineage sorting, for example, loss of traits evolution. But for the most part, that's what we see is nested hierarchies. Go ahead.
Okay, so Darwin predicted transitional forms. In fact, he did so with quite a bit of kind of sorrow, because in at his time there pretty much were none. Paleontology was not a huge boom until, unfortunately, hit the later half of his life, and he actually did live to see Archaeopteryx lithographica get wrenched from the ground. So he was validated in that aspect. But do you see why I have a bit of a problem with the retrodiction idea being, because I think it's more of a philosophical standpoint, like where creationists have kind of been like, okay, well, we've got a lot of this stuff going on, we've got to do something with it, and we might as well call for a nested hierarchy. And from that point, I would say, and this question was coming, where do we draw the line between organisms that are connected by a nested hierarchy, like wolves and dogs, or organisms that are not, which, as creationists propose, and as I'm sure you propose, or I'm not sure, I would wager that you still propose, humans and chimps. So, why do we have you had time to kind of look into that? Because I know we've been kind of doing a back and forth on videos on that. Um, so I don't want to jump you on it if you haven't had the time to look into it.
No, yeah, of course I have. And I think those are good points. I believe that Morris and Gish, they predicted like nested hierarchical patterns in DNA. I believe it was in 1985. I've got a paper here somewhere else. In morphology and anatomy, of course, that was predicted long ago by Darwin. I just think it's obvious, because I feel like some evolutionists will think that like you're supposed to have humans, which are just completely unique and separated by all types of species, right? Equally distant from, say, chimps as they would be with fish. So I'm just saying these groups within groups patterns, I think common sense would tell us, are expected. But of course, there always is lack of uniqueness in the phylogenetic tree. That's why there's those certain things that I talked about. When it comes to the transitional forms, a few mosaics, you can look to Tiktaalik, or you can look to Archaeopteryx, even the reptile like mammals, for example. But the majority does prove the rule, and you've heard it before. For the audience sake, I mean, if we want to build, let's say, a military vehicle that's built for the environments between land and the oceans, well, we would build something like an amphibious assault vehicle, or even a crossover SUV. So based on the design model, these things are expected. Now, you're right. We have to differentiate between the models by looking at a way that can actually draw a line in phylogeny, or where do we, is that pretty much your question now? Like, where do we
Yeah.
differentiate between ancestry?
Well, yes, and as you know, I've asked this question many times before, and there have been many attempts to answer it. It's not my question. It's a very specific version of R and Raw's phylogeny challenge. Mine
Right,
usually
right.
specifically looks at humans and chimps. I don't want anybody to think I'm taking credit for that, because I'm
No,
not.
it's a
But
valid
but
question. It's a good question.
yeah, but my thing is like, I have a problem with that, because that means that genetics and the nested hierarchies that we see in genetics are completely indistinguishable. If you're looking at these two models, right? It's completely indistinguishable to tell which is which, unless, as I know you said in your conversation with conspiracy cats, unless we're looking at the completeness or lack thereof, or rather, sorry, functionality or lack thereof of any given genome. And I don't want to go too far down ENCODE, just because we talked about it so much last
Right.
time. But
If you
I
want, you
did,
could. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
I was going to say, I did take your advice, and I looked into the work that they were doing on those knockout tests, because you posed a good question to me. You said, okay, well, if we know that most of the genome isn't functional, and in conventional geology ENCODE notwithstanding, usually what I have heard, at least in textbooks and things like that, functionality means that it impacts phenotype. So sheer transcription outside of the realm of ENCODE is not typically considered functional. And so you asked me, we were talking about knockout tests for mice, because I had said to you, well, they do these big knockout tests in mice where what they do is they artificially go in, for the audience's sake, and they knock out a bunch of genes, pump, 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 like that. And then they see what happens. Can the mouse
Right.
still reproduce? And they do this usually in vitro. So it's like, can the mouse still reproduce? Does it have normal arms? Does it have a normal tail? And I looked into it, and they managed to, the extent that they have gone to is they can knock out half the entire genome of the mouse, and of the what is considered the junk DNA.
Right.
And it is still like running around doing its deal.
Well,
So
yeah, and that's a good. I wasn't going to point to function just yet. We could talk. I was going to point to something else as a way to draw the line, but since you did bring that up, yeah, I would say I do have a study here where what they did was they knocked out junk DNA of a mouse. And you're right, there were some experiments where the mouse offspring were just fine, but they've also done multiple experiments to see if they corroborate that. But what they found was that I believe there was some long non-coding RNA gene knockouts that actually showed lethality that were associated with the development. I think it was tissues such as the lungs, the heart, the testes, even the brain, for example. And even when they knock out certain classes of retrotransposons in the mouse embryo, when it's when that jumping gene is turned on, the mouse suddenly dies, which shows the importance of certain in various classes of retrotransposons. But what I said in the previous debate as well was that many non-coding RNA genes, even pseudogenes, are only expressed under certain conditions that are not, unfortunately, are not available in lab type settings. But redundancy, I mean, even if you're seeing some genes that are knocked out and the mouse is just fine, I mean, redundancy is an amazing thing. I mean, in computer code, redundancy is highly beneficial. How does evolution explain redundancy, for example? Natural selection sees the long term. That's what, or the natural selection sees the short term. So how does a natural selection help evolve something like redundancy in the genome? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, well, conceptually, and I don't know, I would need to take some time to look into the technical papers on this, but I can answer you from a conceptual standpoint,
Sure,
which is,
of
you're right,
course.
natural selection works in the short term. In fact, there is nothing, there is no kind of gene that is partially really naturally selected, and I want to explain what I mean by that.
Yeah,
It's
take your
either
time.
Yeah, it's either bad and it's selected is kind of fickle, I suppose. But I would
Mhm.
encourage you to look into the concept of precursor mutations, because I think they have quite a bit of bearing on co-option. They're certainly
Yeah.
not the same thing, but essentially the idea of a precursor mutation is that I can't remember who did it, but that there's one guy who has like this classic example of the mousetrap where he removes most of the parts of the mousetrap for it to be a functioning mousetrap, and he's like, it makes a really ugly tie clip. So the idea is that every single stage in the concept of precursor mutations, if you're trying to get a complex structure or behavior or length of DNA, whatever, but every sort of subsequent step is useful in some way. You get what I'm saying? So
Right. Yeah.
this is, and I know this has been done to quite a bit of success with the flagella, but I don't know if it's been done with what you're talking about here. So I would love to look into it.
Yeah.
I very much imagine it's going to be the same type of
Sure.
scenario.
And I would love to look at those papers too, just to kind of go down deep in it. You know what I mean? I want to see how much of it is empirical, how much of it is philosophy, because I think for evolution accounting for, DNA repair and the redundant mechanisms, for example, that we see in the genomes, those redundant mechanisms, as it looked like you agreed with, is it requires forward thinking when we know that natural
Well,
selection works in the short term. So it's like there's so many things in the genome that evolution would have to account for. And I'm willing to look at those papers, but you're looking at self-organization, you're looking at the communication between the cells with other cells.
yeah, I
Um,
mean, with that though, you're talking about the evolution of sort of complex behaviors and what spurs that. I heard an interesting. I was listening to an interesting podcast the other day that covered how behavior always comes before morphologic change. And I believe that is sort of amplified even to a very small degree. Um, but yes, we'll have to
yeah.
swap papers on that
Yes.
and look a bit more into it.
I did want to make one little point about drawing the line in phylogeny. I showed the
Yes, please
I,
do.
I showed because I noticed that you, and I'm glad to hear that you're well informed on the chromosome 2 fusion. So I showed the quote by Ken Miller, who said that, and I'm not saying that every evolutionist has to agree with that, but he did assert beforehand, before they discovered what looks like a chromosomal 2 fusion, that if there was no fusion, there was no ancestry with the great ape family, with the chimpanzees. I know you think humans are apes, so with the apes, or with the chimps and other primates, but
Can you present a reason to why we're not?
well,
I mean, I'm being hypothetical.
okay,
Obviously, we're
right.
not talking about that right now, but
Okay, well,
when you get a moment.
I would just say, if I could demonstrate that there was no chromosomal 2 fusion, which is why I asked you some of those important questions, then just like Ken Miller said, no chromosome 2 fusion, then no ancestry with chimpanzees. And I think that
No,
would
I'm
kind of
comfortable
indicate
with
that we're
that.
not apes.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Well, the thing is if the chromosomal 2 fusion isn't a fusion, then the alternative hypothesis would then subsequently be looked at, which is that the other hominoids gained the chromosome,
Right.
or
Well,
the chromosome pair. But to be very clear, for everyone out in the audience, you can
you do
go
both,
check out.
yeah.
Yeah, because you were there. You were in the chat for my discussion with Steve McRae on this the other day, and
And you guys
Ruhith.
were respectful. I enjoyed listening to that.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Ruhif, I have respect for. I've actually learned a lot from him. I often talk to him in comment section. So I
yeah.
did want to give you, without any interruptions, James, you don't got to worry. We're passionate sometimes. I did want to give you the opportunity to, because I watched that entire broadcast. I managed to get around to it, and I feel like there was a few things that you guys didn't touch on. So I was wondering if you could take some time, maybe, to, because you have spent a lot of time on the chromosomal 2 fusion,
Yeah,
to
sure.
answer those questions. I'm not sure if you remember the questions that I asked in the opening.
Cryptic centromere and satellite DNA, I believe.
Yes, maybe if I can find it. Yeah, so the first question would be, why is the telomeric region so degenerate and small? I did ask that in our first debate. I don't know if we got as far enough to get like a solid answer from you, and I believe you do have an answer, so that's okay.
Oh yeah, no, no, no. I did
Obviously,
not know at that point. I had not looked into it very closely.
I don't want to do, as they say, gish gallop. So why don't we start with
Yeah,
that
pick
question, and
one.
you take as much uninterrupted time as you want to. The satellite DNA is a very important question that I'd like to ask, but let's start with the telomeric region. Why is it so degenerate and small? And then I'll give a response after.
Ruhif actually explained this to me in our conversation with Steve. For those of you out there, in the human chromosome 2 fusion, in the center where the fusion site is proposed to have occurred, there is there are very degenerate telomeric sequences. Now, those telomeric sequences they usually cap the ends of the telomeres. Now, the reason why that's degenerate, and Ruhif pointed this out, I would go back and rewatch that if you would like to hear him explain it better than probably I will, is because you have a gradient on the ends of all chromosomes. So there's fresh new telomeres on the outermost point, then degenerate telomeres, because as we both know, when DNA replicates, the telomere sequences really take a beating. And then after that is when you start to have the classic regular chromosomal, business that chromosomes do, whatever base pairs. So degenerate sequences, according to Ruhif, and he sent me some cool, or rather, he has some cool stuff on his channel that goes over this more in depth. But the reason is because that's entirely expected. In fact, all of the criticisms that I've seen regarding that by individuals like Tompkins, in the responses to Tompkins, they're usually like, why would you expect it not to be degenerate? In fact, if it wasn't, that would be quite weird, because that would suggest that when the fusion occurred, it completely ate up that degenerate site, when the degenerate sites, when they're exposed, is what causes fusion. Essentially, it's like having, I explained it like this when I was talking with Ruhif and Steve. It's like having two magnets. The ends of the magnets are degenerate telomeric sequences, and they want to stick together. But those new telomeres that are on the ends are like putting a cloth in between the magnets, so they can't. There's no real way for them to. It's like a weakened attraction. That's a very rudimentary way of explaining it. And interestingly enough, I'm just going to kill two birds with one stone here, because we talked a bit about satellite DNA.
Right.
Telomere fusions, which Tompkins objects to, the fact that telomere fusions can happen, which is what we see in human chromosome 2, they do happen. And Ruhif gave me two great papers for that. One occurred in pigs, and the other one occurred in equids. And what we find in both of those is the same thing that we see in human chromosome 2, which is telomeres stuck together like this, not satellite DNA, not satellite telomere DNA, telomere. So, and I can send you those papers if you would like, or I can put them in the description.
Yeah, of course, of course. I really appreciate that response. That was well said and very concise.
Not as good as Ruhif did it. That's for sure.
For James's sake, I did time it. It was about 2 minutes, so I don't want him to think that I'm going on for too long as well. So we'll do equal time here. Actually, before I respond to the telomere one, the question I was a little different about the satellite DNA because chimps have this very distinctive and exceptionally large satellite sequences at the end of their chromosomes, not the satellite DNA that Tompkins was talking about when the centromere breaks, for example. Because, like you said, if this is a telomere to telomere, you may predict that maybe there won't be that satellite DNA. So that was a little different question. I was asking where are those large 8 specific satellite sequences in the reputed fusion
Would
site?
Would you like me to, as quickly, under 30 seconds, explain that as well?
Yeah, you know what? Take 30 seconds, explain that, and then I'll try and address both at the same time. Take
Yeah,
your time.
I figured. Yeah, I figured you could just go ahead and just take a
It's
take
just
a.
because it was
chunk.
yeah, and I appreciate you answered the other satellite DNA objection, but this one was a little different. So take
Yeah,
your
sure.
time.
It was my mistake. I goofed it up in my head.
That's okay.
Yes. So the ends of the chromosomes, like I said earlier, those are the areas that are most frequently in the chromosome, sort of renovated, so to speak, if you want to call it that, because they just take such a beating in cellular replication, replication. So I don't understand why, given evolutionary theory and what it says, why it would be difficult to sort of conceptually, what's the word I'm looking for, conceptually square those two things together. Because according to evolution, maybe it's different with sort of the creation outlook on it, but to be clear, from an evolutionary perspective, we expect mutations on those repetitive sequences on the edge of the telomere because they're renovated so frequently. So given the split between humans and chimps was 7-ish million years ago, that's quite a long it's similar to the degenerate concept. That's quite a long time to be developing sort of unique sequences. In fact, 7 is seems to me, on a totally an anecdotal note, seems to me like not that many, compared to, given you've got 7 million years. Sorry,
Are you
take as
saying
long as you need. I will
no, no,
drink my.
no, I just want to make sure you answer that last one, just to because I want you to feel confident in your answer. So the question on those very large satellite sequences at the ends of their chromosomes with apes, are you saying that? So are you saying those are absent in man because of the divergence time of 6 million years that would have got rid of it? That
I'm
apes
saying I'm saying that if you have two chromosomes like this, right, and
right?
the ends are constantly changing to a degree, right, because of cellular replication and repair. Now, if they suddenly join together and that lineage continues onward, you're no longer getting a change in those end telomeric sequences. But if they stay separate like they are in the rest of the hominoids, those areas can still be subject to change and mutation. So I don't know why you would expect it's like any of the other, pick any difference between humans and chimps, and the reason that it's there, according to evolutionary theory, is because it's been 7 million years. So there's naturally going to, it's kind of like how we've noted that we've had the conversation before, how there are orphan genes that are unique to humans and there are orphan genes that are unique to chimps. Even though they share a great majority, there's still been time for unique novelties to accumulate. I'm sorry,
Okay,
that was a long
okay,
time.
so are you saying that those unique sequences that are those 8 specific satellite DNA sequences that should be seen flanking the reputed fusion site on both sides, if there really was a chromosomal fusion, after the split between the chimps and human ancestors, say 6 million years ago, are you saying the reason we don't find that, just I guess yes or no from what I gathered with what you're saying, is because of the divergence time? There's been enough time for that those 8 specific sequences to be lost. Is that more or less what you're saying?
Divergence or speciation, either. If you want to go for divergence, you've got 13 million years, maybe, depending on who you talk.
Okay. So the
So,
reason
but
we don't, so
yes,
the
it's
reason we
more or
don't,
less.
yeah, I just don't want to put words in your mouth. So you're saying that the reason we don't find those sequences around the reputed fusion site is because of the deep time since the fusion. They've been lost essentially for whatever reason.
Yes, according to the evolutionary paradigm, that tracks very well with everything else that we say.
Okay. Okay. I think, okay, so I wrote down as much as I could from what you said on the telomeres. So I think, contrary to what you're saying, even the original paper, and I would ask the audience to read it, even the authors there, the researchers, they emphasize a level of confusion and awe as to why the head-to-head arrays of repeats at the fusion site there have degenerated so much from the near perfect arrays found in telomeres that you described, right? So you can examine the fusion site for yourself. Anybody can do it. It's an extremely small segment of DNA compared to what should be present if a fusion actually did occur in the deep evolutionary past. I think the site is about 798 bases in size. Now, I understand with what you're saying is you would expect it to be degenerate. But even if there were two very small size telomeres that fuse, let's say, we're still looking at about 10,000 bases. And then if it were larger telomeres that fuse, then it's an even bigger problem, because obviously, since now we are looking at about 30,000 bases in size. And yet what we see in this signature is a pathetic 798 bases as the remnant of a so-called ancient fusion. But I think what you're saying is also weak as a rebuttal, because why would both of the fusing chromosomes be degraded to exactly the same point, yielding a minimized semi-symmetrical fusion? But I think the most fatal blow to what you're saying here, as a way to explain why the area is so degenerate, and I want you to comment on this, of course, is that we see these telomeric repeats, these internally telomeric repeats that you're pointing to, right? Because if we're saying that it's too degenerate, that implies that something's still there. So what is it? Well, we see those telomere repeats occurring throughout the entire genome. And these internal telomeric sequences are found to be functional. I've got many published papers here that's giving us functions for these sites. So they're binding to things called transcription factors. And what they do is they initiate the copying process of a gene into RNA. And what's amazing, it's kind of a double whammy, because that's yet more confirmation of our model, because we predict much of the genome, as you know, and many of these DNA sequences, for example, cytochrome C and other conserved genes, have multiple roles and multiple functions that play in the regulation of the cell, and many other things, of course. So how do you explain the fact that that region is found throughout the genome? They're not found throughout the genome in relation to fusions. They're actually just functional sequences. So have you heard of that argument?
I want to
Yes,
give
I have.
Erika a chance to reply, and I think
No,
what we might do is go into the closings right after that. So go ahead. The floor is all yours, Erika.
Yeah, sure. And standing, we're gonna have to talk about radiometric decay at some point. That is, to me, one of the biggest blows to the creationism model that there is. So at some point,
I do feel bad. I mean, if James wants to give us an extra 5 minutes of discussion to touch on that, I mean, I don't mind that. But I mean, it looks like I don't mind after you answer this question and even just briefly touch on the cryptic centromere. I mean,
yeah.
Are we running low on time there, James? I feel like we just started talking.
If you guys would like to, that's okay with me.
Yeah, standing and I have a good time. Yeah, that works. 5 minutes. I'm sure we can at least broach the topic.
Yeah, let's do this. If you could answer what I said about the telomeric sequences, a really quick response to the cryptic centromere. I can do a quick response to that too. And then we'll give like the last few minutes to radiometric dating if you'd like to.
Yeah, well, and in fact, I'm not opposed to foregoing my closing necessarily if we would rather just have more conversation. But if you want a closing, I'm cool with doing closings as well. So it totally just depends.
Sure, you take your time, as much time as you need to address the points I made, and then we'll play it by ear.
Yeah, okay, so one, I noticed that you said that the fusion site is small compared to what we should expect, and I wrote down on what basis, essentially, like what are we comparing it to? What other fusion sites specifically? Because according to the paper that I can link in the comments, the two papers, actually, one on pigs and the other one on equids, specifically the zebras. It's very analogous. So, and it's a telomere fusion. So again, on finding telomeric sequences throughout the rest of the human genome in areas that aren't necessarily telomere specific, I would be interested to see, and I would predict that they are not found in the same bulk as they are in the center of human chromosome 2, because there are two things that make the telomeric sequences found in the center of human chromosome 2 so very important and so very indicative of fusion. And the thing number one is that there's so many of them, and the thing number two is that they exist there in accordance with the synotony, both behind and in front of the one on top, and I guess whatever, on top of the one on top and below the one on bottom, with synotony with the chimp chromosome 2A and 2B. In fact, when I was doing research for my most recent video, I found out that every single gene on the chimp side tracks to human chromosome 2 from 2A and 2B, if memory serves. They track over. Human chromosome 2 is a bit bigger, but mostly it's those pesky repetitive sequences that show up in most hominoid genomes. So, and with regard to the centromere, actually, I didn't have a chance to write it down earlier. I watched your conversation with Conspiracy Cats.
I'm not interrupting, I promise. You didn't really answer why those internally located clusters of telomere sequences are more common in the genome than just, where we're looking, and why they are now found to be extremely important.
Oh no, but I did, because it's context specific. The fact that we're finding the telomeric sequence in the center of this chromosome, chromosome 2, in massive bulk in comparison to where we find them elsewhere in the human genome, is very, very indicative of a fusion site. And that is taken in accordance with the fact that the rest of chromosome 2, on either side of the fusion site, tracks gene for gene with chimp A, chimp 2A, and chimp 2B. To be clear, I'm not saying that they're identical. The human chromosome 2 is a bit bigger, but again, it's those weird indels that make up the approximately 3% difference between humans and chimps. With regard to the centromere, what I was going to say was that I took a screenshot of your conversation with Conspiracy Cats, because I remembered this was from several days ago, that he had brought to your attention the fact that there is a cryptic centromere.
Right.
You disagreed that it was a cryptic centromere, but for those of you who want to know specifically, I suppose the name of it, it's Q21.3 and Q22.1 regions. And I don't know why it wouldn't be cryptic. If you're sort of fusing two chromosomes together, would you not suspect that areas, given it's a centromere, that it's going to be at least partially written over or subject to the same mutations that the rest of the chromosome is subject to? I don't know why we would even expect it to be crystal clear. So I hope that at least, even if you disagree, I hope that at least you got an answer to each of your
Right.
questions.
It's not that I disagree that that is the point or the area that they choose to look to, because I understand, and you obviously understand that if there was a fused chromosome, if two fused chromosomes, then you would have to demonstrate not only the legitimate fusion site, which is why we're talking about the telomeric region, but
Yes.
also locate a disabled second centromere, the cryptic centromere, I guess you could call
Yes.
it. So
And
you
there
pointed
is
to,
a proposed
right.
cryptic second
So
centromere.
I
Yeah.
guess, my follow up to that, and maybe a question to go along with it, is that so that 171 base pair repeat that characterizes primate centromeres, right, which would have to be found. It is that region, or that sequence, is found in many other parts in the human genome. And I have pointed out in the past, you've obviously watched the Conspiracy Cats debate, which I would recommend anyone watch that. It's too small and too human to be a remnant centromere, but you said that that's expected. But I think the fatal blow to that is that the entire sequence is internal to a functional gene, that ancient centromere site. So that means it would be impossible if that sequence had ever been a real centromere. But I think the fact that the cryptic centromere is a functional region inside a protein coding gene, encompassing both protein coding and non-coding regions, strongly implies that it's a key gene feature and not a defunct centromere, as you're pointing out here. How would you respond to that?
Why? Yeah, but why would it? I mean, there again, you can point to the fact that people who conventional science, when it proposes the human chromosome 2 fusion, it notes that there is on the center of chromosome 2, so the actual proposed fusion site, not even the cryptic centromere, that there is sort of a ghostly trace of a functional gene, the DXL11, whatever. I can't remember what it's called. I'm messing it up, but you know the one I mean.
The DDX11L2.
Yeah, the DXL11L2. Yes, that's very classic for the, again, it's part of telomeric family, which is gene family, which is very interesting. But for the same way that I would answer that question, why is it against the rules to have a gene move onto a fusion site or move onto a cryptic centromere? I would be interested. I don't know this, but what I want to look into is, can we find a promoter anywhere near the cryptic centromere? Because if I remember correctly, and the reason I said I'm going to look into it is because I don't. I feel like I remember reading at some point somewhere that the cryptic centromere is the functional gene that's on top of it is somewhat new. at least with regard to
I'm not
evolutionary theory.
but remember that 171 base pair region is associated with other locations in the human genome that have no relation to a fusion event, and they're functional to the genetics is the point. So yeah, it's located internally of a gene, but
But
it's
they're not a
also the
bulk.
sequence itself is functional, just like those telomeric repeats. So both of those sequences, the telomeric repeats and the centromeric repeats that you're pointing to as ancient telomeres and an ancient centromere, seem to be, the evidence is suggesting that they're just DNA elements that are found throughout the entire genome. So why are
Wait,
you cherry picking that to say that these are the remnants of a ancient fusion event? Is
wait a
to me
second. I actually did not know this. Are you saying that centromeric repeats are found in the cryptic centromere, and then you're saying that it's not a cryptic centromere?
right. Well, I'm saying
Because I
that
didn't
those
know that there
aren't.
were I didn't know there were centromere signatures there. Like I thought it was more of a location with maybe a handful. If you're comparing it to the fusion site, then why? I mean, my answer is exactly the same for both of those. I would imagine, and I
I'm just
don't know
saying the
this for
basis. Yeah.
certain, that centromere, those centromeric repeats that we find there are found in larger quantities than they are elsewhere in the genome. Because you haven't said anything to suggest that at the telomere fusion site, right? That those little telomeric signatures that we find elsewhere in the genome are
Right.
in the same quantity, because that's very important.
Good
You
question.
can
Good.
find these things like
I
gangles
will
on
answer
the
it.
end of
Yeah.
chromosomes.
I think we're both guilty of saying a lot of things, so sometimes we'll forget. Yeah. Those telomeric sequences, those internally telomeric sequences, they're found in parts of the genome in a few hundred base pairs in length, even a few thousand. And they're, for the most part, so all different types of lengths of, I guess, sizes, but they're um, associated with function. You
So
know, they're not,
they're found at the same size as they are
no,
in
they,
the
different sizes, different sizes.
but not as large. None are found quite as large. I feel comfortable proposing that. Am I correct in that?
Are you saying not as large? I mean, the reputed fusion site region's only what, 798 base pairs?
I'm saying, do you know for certain that the same number of telomeric repeats that we find at the proposed fusion site are found elsewhere in the human genome and are functional?
Yes, some are smaller, some
But
are
but none are
more.
none are the same size, are they?
The same, they could be.
Because
I mean,
that's key.
those
That's
sequences that are found there, I'm saying, are just found all throughout the genome, just like the
yes,
sequence.
but not in the same. That's what I'm going to assume that that's what you're saying, because I feel like I'm not getting a clear answer. Um, would it be okay with you if we quickly touched on radiometric dating
Of
here?
course, of course. Because I don't want to leave anything hanging. I don't want you to think that I didn't answer that question. I'm not exactly sure how large the sequences are. I'm just saying that
Okay,
there are many other internal
that's fair
sites
enough.
all over the genome where telomere sequences occur in like this, and that are functional. And one last point I wanted to say in response to your the centromere sequences is that actually Tompkins pointed this out, and then I'll even give you the last word on the chromosome 2 fusion before we go into the dating. But he
Thank
pointed out that, and I want to see your thoughts, that centromere sequences are made up of variants of alphoid DNA sequences, a class of DNA sequences, right? There are different variants, though, of these alphoid sequences that can be placed into different groups or categories. So some types are found all over the genome, while others are specific to centromeres. This is the key issue on what we're discussing here. The type of alphoid sequence found at the cryptic centromere site on the human chromosome 2 does not actually match alphoids associated with functional human chromosomes. So there's no consistency there. Like, how would you? What are your thoughts? Like those alphoid sequences, I want to make it more clear, found at the so-called cryptic centromere are a
yes,
type commonly found in the human genome outside centromeres, which
yes.
we can just label them as higher order repeats. So, like, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, my question would be, when you're finding these in other locations, it's very similar to my question with the telomeric sequence. Are they found in the same volume? And again, I think this is left out. So that's sort of my answer to that. But as a tag on for those of you
I
watching,
would
I
say
think
yes. As an answer, I would just say yes. In the same volume, greater volume. I mean, all parts of the genome, these sequences are found in all different sizes, all different quantities. They're found to be associated with important functions in the genome. That's why Tompkins is saying, okay, this area is degenerate with the telomeric sequences. Well, there still is, a 798 base pair region there. What is it? And then he's discovered that these sequences are found throughout we've already talked about this, but my answer would be, yeah, size-wise, quantity-wise, all different types of quantities throughout the genome. But exact numbers, I'm not sure.
That feels a little bit like a either put a pin in it or like a cop out, because it's like, obviously if we don't know, because I don't know, I will tell you right now, I do not know the number that is found outside of this telomere or outside of the cryptic centromere. It's something that I want to look into,
Sure.
but if we don't know for sure, then we kind of just have to say we don't know. Saying they're found in all sorts of different sizes is somewhat irrelevant, because what I don't know is whether or not finding larger sequences is equally as sort of precluded as a potential analog as too small sizes. Like, is it the perfect size for a telomere fusion? If I remember correctly, and I could be incorrect on this, but I'm fairly certain, according to those two papers on telomere site fusions in equids and in pigs, it's quite analogous.
Well, real quick, I did quote earlier from the actual paper of the chromosome 2 fusion. They did ask, why is this area so degenerate? And even if it was too small, degenerate telomeres, you should still see remnant telomeric sequences of at least 10,000, but all we see is 798.
But standing in the original paper of finding Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, they were like, well, why is it that the pelvis looks like this? I mean, if I remember correctly, the human chromosome 2 fusion paper was like either in the early 80s or the early 90s. Like, to suggest that them not knowing what was going on is somehow indicative of the fact that now there is indeed an answer to that question. Other than saying, well, I don't like what Tompkins does, which is saying, I don't like it because XYZ, or I disagree because XYZ. But I don't think you can just point to a past paper and say they didn't know what it was and use that as evidence to bolster your point.
Well, and I don't want to recycle everything that I said in my response as to why I believe that argument fails. We'd probably just be repeating ourselves there. And
Yeah, we would be. I'm just saying that it's kind of pointless to bring the paper up, the fact that the original discoverers of the fusion site were like, well, we don't know why it's degenerate. I very much doubt that if I went back and read that paper, that they said, we don't know why it's degenerate, therefore it's not a human chromosome 2 fusion. I think that, like most scientists do when they don't know the answer to the question, they say, well, we don't know. Why is it like that? Maybe we'll find an answer. But then I don't think it's... Oh, go ahead.
But even in that region, even the repeats that are found exist mostly as independent units and not actually tandem repeats. And I believe it's only like 10 intact TTAGG telomere sequences and only 42 CCTAA intact reverse complement sequences that exist. So it seems like all the evidence, when you actually look at it and examine it, and the fact that these sequences, as I've stated, are found internally all over the genome and have various functional roles, that does seem to falsify. I understand that when they first saw it, they were thrown off. Why is this area so degenerate?
Right.
So they explained it away, like you said. But when we examine it even further, we see that the evidence does not support that claim as to why it's so degenerative.
We don't see that. We have an answer for the degeneracy. It's just very...
it doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold up.
But why not?
Well, I've given probably about 5 or 6 reasons.
The degenerate sequence specifically. Why does it not... Like, why is it completely precluded in your mind? Remember the magnet example that I gave? When we do find the tips of chromosomes with degenerate telomere regions and then intact telomere regions, why wouldn't you expect to find degenerate telomeres in the middle if once you strip away those pristine telomeres, it makes it easier to fuse? It's like
because they're not telomeric sequences. I've already said this 5 times. And even if they were, why would both of the fusing chromosomes be degraded to exactly the same point, yielding a minimized semi-symmetrical fusion site? I get that that's the philosophy.
Did you just say they're not telomeric sequences after saying, why are the telomeric sequences so degraded?
I'm saying that the area that is being claimed that these are the remnants of ancient telomeres is too degenerate. Now you're explaining away the degeneracy, but I'm
Yet.
showing you that they're not even the remnants of an ancient chromosomal 2 fusion, because these sequences are DNA elements found throughout the genome. That's the thing. Just like the sequences, I think it's 171 base pair sequences or base pairs that's found at the so-called cryptic centromeric site. Those are also found spread throughout the genome. And I get your question is what's the quantity, but those are functional DNA elements as well, as my point.
I think
Yes,
we've gone to about 5 minutes, so I'm going to give Erika a chance to respond, and then we will go into closings.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so and we'll have to do that radiometric decay another time, Standing, because I feel like you're running from me on it a little bit. But we
I'll
said we were going to do
address it right now if you'd like me to.
I've heard enough of that. All right, we're going to go back to
it's
Erika.
okay.
I'll address it in my closing.
Sure. And you can
And then we'll have a
close
separate debate on it. Age of the Earth, round 4.
Oh, please. I would love to chat with you on Age of the Earth.
You know what? You've heard it today. Round 4 is Age of the Earth. In my closing, I'll briefly touch on the isochron.
Sure.
I got 3 minutes, and then we'll schedule that.
Yes. So I will, as James said, take the last word on this. So what I heard was, why is the site so degenerate? And then I said, well, it's degenerate. The proposed idea is that it's degenerate because that's what we see in other species, XYZ, explaining it with magnets. And then you said, but that can't be because they're not telomeres. And then my answer to that, of course, is, well, how do we know that? Why is it being proposed? You say, well, it's because we find little DNA elements that are very similar to what we find at the center of the telomere. And then I say, are they in the same number? And your answer, as you very honestly said, and I say very frequently myself because it's so common, at least for me, that you didn't know what the size range was, what the typical size range was for what we would expect to see at a telomere site. And then I responded to that by saying, if I remember correctly from Ruha's video, which is not a certainty, while the previous stuff I felt decently confident on, it's fairly analogous to what we see in other organisms. And that's I do not think that there is anything that I have not at least provided an answer to. Those of you out in the audience, you can take that as you will. So Standing, please close for us, and I will give my little closing after that, and then we can do Q&A.
All right, setting the timer for 3 minutes for you, Standing for Truth. And I think you already know, nothing would give me more pleasure than to cut you off during your statement. So
James, you're lucky I'm easygoing, or I'd find you and show you that I can bench press more than you.
Ooh, feisty. I like it.
That's a threat, James.
I like it.
Just kidding.
The floor is all yours.
Okay, awesome. So with the dating methods, for example, I know you like to use isochron dating. And for the audience, isochron is a graphical plot of the isotopic compositions of the sample. So it allows an isochron age to be calculated from a straight line plotted through the graph of the results. You can watch Conspiracy Cat's debates or his videos, and you can see that straight line, which is indicative of accurate ages. But what's funny is geologists have calculated ages for all the individual samples of the same geologic formation using the same dating method, including the isochron, and they turned out to be vastly different. And some of these rocks are from the Grand Canyon. It was Dr. Steve Austin used 3 different isochron methods. Also, these dates all disagree greatly with each other, even when the error margins are taken into account. So the 3 different dating methods give completely different ages that cannot really be explained away. And as far as speeding up the decay rate, I've given a few examples with fission tracks and radial halos and, for example, helium in my opening. But according to the catastrophic plate tectonics model, the CPT meters per second plate movement would produce new oceanic crust, replacing the old one. This new oceanic crust would show the same age through isochron dating, since it formed all at the same time. I wanted to address real quick I believe she said, how would we explain away the heat? Yeah, a lot of heat would be generated, but the massive amount of water that was on the Earth at the time, based on the flood, would shield Noah. And the RATE project explains this. So they do have answers, and it would also shield the animals on the ark. If you have a mile or more of water, of course, we even use water, as Erika probably knows, in a nuclear reactor to protect and to shield things. So this would not only shield from radiation, but it would also take up much of the heat. There's also a ton of evidence that at the breaking up of the fountains of the Great Deep, there would have involved supersonic steam jets that would have taken up most of the heat up into space and more. So the RATE project goes over a number of these things. But the thing is, all these radioisotope methods that have been long been praised as irrefutable dating of the Earth to an old age, as Erika talks about here, have repeatedly failed to give reliable and meaningful absolute ages for all types of rocks, including the Grand Canyon. That means these ages are relative and not absolute. I could go on and on. I'm probably almost done here, but the direct evidence, the genetic evidence, does show an Adam and an Eve just 6,000 years ago. I mean, this is based on the empirical method. There's just so many other things we could probably discuss. We'll save that for another day, but this flew by. I had a lot of fun. You can have the last words there, Erika. And
yeah, sure.
Setting it up.
I will. Yes, I will. I thank you for your closing. I will do my closing as well. I'm going to close the genetics concept by just saying I have a problem with gene sense mutation rate. Look into the Soares paper. And as far as the Y chromosome, I just don't see an issue with it. And those of you out there can be your own judge. I encourage you to do look into it on your own. I think that would be good. I have this excellent book here, and I was listening as intently as I could, but I had it bookmarked and I lost my bookmark. So I was leafing through, kind of paying attention and looking at the same time. So it's called The Bible Rocks in Time. I'm a very big fan of it. It's by these two. I hope that's not mirrored. Well, whatever. It's got a cool fish on it, so that's how you can identify it. It's by two Christian geologists. They have a whole section in here. It's like 100 pages long on radiometric dating, and they actually have an excellent selection on isochron dating, because to my knowledge, I could be incorrect on Austin, but at least Woodmarap, when he was trying to date materials, he appealed to this idea called the mixing hypothesis to go ahead and be like, oh, look, isochron dating doesn't work. And these guys say, to sum up, appeals to the mixing hypothesis by young Earth advocates to account for the isochron plots fail completely because of the failure to understand the empirical, geologic, and geochemical factors that enter into the interpretation of the diagrams. And then, as I hope to do in a video at some point, they have this incredible list of things that at least Woodmarap just completely threw out the window when he was putting those numbers forward. I don't know about Austin. I would like to look into it. But this has an excellent passage at the end of it. Again, these are two Christian geologists who really don't have a dog in the fight with regard to geology. They just don't really find the age of the Earth very important to their faith. But they say, at the very worst, all that discrepant ages indicate is that the geologic conditions are so complex that radiometric dating methods are not as accurate as we might like. The fact that discordances do occur from time to time, however, should grant little solace for proponents of a young Earth, for the simple reason that almost invariably the ages obtained by different methods from the same body of rock are on the order of hundreds of thousands to a few billion years old. Geochronologists generally do not encounter situations in which one method yields an age of 57 million years from a given rock body, whereas an alternative yields 5,700 years. Even rock samples with discordant ages are almost invariably extremely ancient. And then they do this excellent rundown on discordant dates, because it turns out a discordant date is very loose because geologists are very honest. So if they have three dates and one is 1.3 billion, the other is 1.33, and another is 1.34, those are three discordant dates, but you get the general idea that it's at least 1.3-ish billion years old. So I'm going to conclude my statement on radiometric dating with that, and hope that we can continue that on a later date. I'm ready for the Q&A. I hope I got some questions. Standing always hogs them.
You got it. We are very excited for that. So we're going to run through as many questions as we can, folks. This is always fun. I want to say thanks so much for our guests being with us tonight as we go into the Q&A now. I want to remind everybody, their links are in the description. So if you're listening and you want more, you know where to find it. And with that, first up, Dildo Baggins, thanks for your super chat. I don't know if it really says that on their birth certificate, but they said, did you screen these interlocutors? Obviously, an impersonation of Darth, my dearest friend and arch nemesis.
James, you're giggling like a schoolgirl.
I am talking to Darth on Discord right now. I'm trying to talk him into coming back on. So we're going to see. We'll get him. Okay, IceClaw526, thanks for your super chat, says, love you guys. You make my days at work enjoyable. Well, so kind.
Oh, that's sweet.
That's very kind.
They're not coming at me. That's weird.
Oh, don't worry, we'll get there. Brandon
No,
Ardeline,
no.
thanks for
I
your
thought I was getting off the hook.
thanks for your super chat. Who said evolution is 100% supported by science. Intelligent design / creationism is 100% supported by the fact that dying is scary. Standing.
That's for you, Standing. That's not for me, but I do
Are you sure
appreciate the
that's
mimic
not
of
for
my
you?
opener.
I would say that, creationists are the ones making the predictions right now. I guess we'll have to wait for another discussion to really go into more detail on DNA function, but we're have many predictions on DNA function, mitochondrial DNA, which we've discussed plenty on. So I think the science is based on, those who are making testable and falsifiable predictions, and creationists are doing it right now. So
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Next up, appreciate your super
trying
chat.
to keep it short, James.
That was very
Wasn't
good.
that was probably the shortest answer I ever gave, and I had a lot more to say too. So thank me later.
Appreciate that. And JB, thanks for your super chat, who said, go to SJ Thomason's Twitter page and vote Modern Day Debate. That's really nice of you. I'm only saying it because he made me say it in a super chat. And
we all love Modern Day Debate.
Ben Riley, thanks for your kind words. Appreciate that. Ben Riley, thanks for your super chat, who again, Ben, you are determined, said, get Daniel from Hard Lens Media to go against Vosh. I've gotten Daniel's email, so I will reach out to these guys and see if they're willing to go toe-to-toe. So thanks for that idea. Next up, thanks for your super chat. Kakarat, let me know if I said that wrong, said, great practice for my upcoming debate with Hovind. Well, very exciting. And
Good luck.
Is that on Modern Day Debate?
No. Someone showed me a screenshot of his email today on why he will not return to Modern Day Debate. But you know what? That's all right. We got no hard feelings. Life is, you can't just, if you get angry, if you have a grudge, it's only hurting yourself. You have to let everything go. Be happy.
You're doing a great job, James. You're doing a great job.
Movie Theory, thanks for your super chat, who said, standing for truth already won, in all caps. Good job standing for truth. That's nice. Your mom sent a super chat.
I even paid her to say that too.
That's excellent. That's Deadly D1001. Thanks for your super chat, who said, I always pronounce Jensens. Nathaniel Jensen.
Nobody really knows.
Close enough, James. Close enough.
Close enough.
They say he uses somatic, not germline substitution rate.
Right. So, I don't want to rehash and be redundant. We talked a lot about this in the discussion portion. So I would invite anybody to watch that. But Dr. Nathaniel Jensen has looked at a multitude of studies. You can see that in his book. You can see that in the end notes. He's accounted for heteroplasmy. He's accounted for that which is somatic, dyads and triads. And it all converges as well. It all corroborates, and most importantly, he's made testable predictions, and specifically the one on the stamp of human history is fruitful right now. You can see that it's working well. He's got a 10-part series. I'd recommend anyone watching it. So that's it.
You got it. And let's see, Dapper Dino is doing an after show of which he had said that they sent the link to Erika. So just so you know, we are happy to plug any after show for any debate that we have on Modern Day Debate. That includes the big ones, if you're hey, this one between, so-and-so, let us know. And if you beforehand can give us a link, we'll put it in the description for you. And we'll do that for either side. So next up, thanks so much for your super chat from our dearest friend, Sphere itself, who says, Erika is wonderful at debating, so respectful.
Hey, I'm here to have a good time and engage in some fun discussion. And Standing and I have fun. We get along quite well. We get a little feisty, but we're on good terms. We're on good. I think I can count on one finger the number of bad experiences I've had with debating on YouTube. So
that's awesome. And let's get real. The audience likes when we get a bit feisty once in a while.
Hey, yeah, you gotta mix it up.
Right, yeah.
So true. And thanks for your super chat, Vandalia 1998. They had said, could the Y chromosome Noah and mitochondria Eve, you say, was 4,500 years ago be for a local group of migrants and not for the entire human race?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. So it wouldn't be the mitochondrial DNA. It would be the Y chromosome based on the fast mutation rate. Once again, Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, he's looked at some subsequent studies. I think there's been about 4, maybe 5. No, I think there's been about 4. One in 2009, another in 2015, and a couple more. He looked at studies based on high quality DNA and showed that Y chromosome atom is consistent with just 4,500 years ago. And as we know, according to the flood model, that would be Noah. So mutation accumulation shows just 4,500 years worth of Y chromosome. And I don't believe there's any real solid evidence that this was a population of, say, 10,000 or so. So good question.
Gotcha. And thanks for your super chat from Sphere itself, who says, "Oh yeah, James, we get it already. You're a sexy guy. You don't have to prove it every debate." Well, that's very nice. As I've mentioned, I think Sphere itself, it's just an alias for Earl, the 65-year-old postman from Alabama. So appreciate that every time, Earl. Michael Dresden, one of our regular trolls, thanks for your super chat, said, "One cannot defend evolution and still be honest."
Ooh,
You know what?
okay.
I've heard that. I've seen Michael around. Michael gets a little vitriolic sometimes. I think. If Michael would like to have a conversation with me, I do try to be as honest as I am capable of. I don't believe I've ever, at least here on Modern Day Debate, lied intentionally. But I do get things wrong. I definitely get things wrong.
Do not take Michael seriously. Michael will say anything and anything. So let's see. Next up, Caleb, as he sometimes likes to be called, says black-rimmed glasses should be a requirement to appear on Modern Day Debate. I couldn't agree more.
I agree, James. We're matched. We've been matching the past couple times. I don't think I've seen you without the glasses in a while.
It's true.
Maybe I'm thinking of different debates. I don't know.
You guys wear them well. You wear them well.
We're gonna have to put some black rim, the hipster glasses, on your superhero standing for truth picture.
Believe it or not, I'm wearing the same type of glasses right now. So there you go.
Oh my gosh, so hip. Next
I
up,
copied James.
Thanks for your super chat from Corporal Annan, who says, "Why would creation predict mosaics which agree with evolutionary expectations, i.e. Tiktaalik and not griffin or mermaid type mosaic forms?"
A good question. I did explain briefly, I guess, in the discussion why we would predict mosaics. The majority proves the rule. You can point to a few, as I stated. Tiktaalik is one of them. And I believe when you actually go into detail on every single one of these transitionals, you'll find that they are not as strong evidence as the evolutionists would say. For example, Tiktaalik, since that's what he brought up, those claim tetrapod traits that are found, they're actually consistent with many living and extinct lobe-fin fish species today. And also they've discovered in Poland, it was tetrapod trackways that actually predates Tiktaalik by nearly 20 million years. So I think in regards to Tiktaalik, the evidence couldn't be any more clear. Tiktaalik was nothing more than a bottom-dwelling lobe-finned fish, and it suffers from what's called the grandfather paradox. So
Standing, we should have a conversation about those Poland trackways. I've had a talk with someone about those at great length before, because they brought them to my attention. I didn't know about them, and so I did a deep dive on it. We should have a chat about that sometime.
Yeah. Hey, my channel anytime.
Gotcha. And thanks so much. Appreciate your super chat from Caleb. Again, says, "I guess Skylar is, I don't know, I don't understand this. I'm just confused. So I might have to come back to that one. I don't want to throw Skylar under the bus when he's not here to defend himself." Corporal Annan, thanks to your super chat, said, "Why would creation predict mosaic?" Oh, yeah, that's embarrassing.
Could have sworn that let me answer that. I'll go into it a different one.
Haha. Okay. Mothra J Disco, thanks for your super chat, says, "This isn't really a debate because evolution is true."
Erika paid that person to say that one this time.
Everyone who's nice to me in the comments is a paid shill. Every single one.
Next up, Slam RN, thanks for your super chat. Really appreciate it. said, for standing for truth, do you believe modern humans have Neanderthal DNA? And if yes, why would God allow interbreeding? Were they human when they were human? Also, what does Erika think about this?
So I guess I'll answer first. Yes, we do have Neanderthal DNA in our in our DNA, of course. You can look at our first debate where we kind of discussed a lot of the human evolution evidence and how it fits in our model. And we would explain, for example, Neanderthals, we'd explain as inbred subpopulations that broke off after Babel, and I think you can see this. I've got a paper that shows that the Neanderthal was highly inbred, had very high genetic load. You can see the same in Homo floresiensis, was very, very highly inbred. Actually, the hobbits seem to suffer from reductive evolution, and what that results in is reduced body size, reduced brain volume, and other pathologies. You can see this in Naledi. So yeah, it's a very easy answer. These populations of so-called subhumans like Neanderthal, hobbits, Naledi, they broke off after Babel. They were isolated, they inbred, and they experienced rapid genetic degeneration. So I think that can explain all the weird-looking morphological features. So hope that wasn't too long, James, but on to you there, Erika.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned Naledi because Naledi has very ape-like basal shoulders as well. So I find it interesting that the reductive evolution they experienced made them look more like chimpanzees. I would say absolutely yes. All we at least according to my current knowledge, we know that 5 different hominins actually lived at the same time: Floresiensis, Naledi, Neanderthalensis. Obviously sapiens, and depending on who you talk to, actually no, definitely Denisovans. I was thinking about, some people think maybe Heidelbergensis was still lurking around, but again, it depends. And of course they interbred. I mean, it's very interesting, but if you look into the potential hybridization ability or potential between humans and living members of genus Pan, you will be unpleasantly surprised, because there really isn't a ton that prevents the fertilization from occurring. In fact, there was a recent very cool paper that came out in the past 6 months. I couldn't tell you when exactly. Time has been very much a weird void lately, thanks to everything that's going on. But that talked about how the human lineage and the Pan lineage actually probably interbred until about 4 million years ago. So we're talking, the Australopithecines, and their sort of version would have potentially been able to create viable offspring. So primates are weird. That's the answer.
Can I just respond real quick to it was my question.
You have to
I should
keep
get the
going.
last word. James, I don't find you very fair today.
I don't know. They asked for both of you.
It's my question.
They asked for both of you, though.
Real quick, let me just respond to that. I've been pretty patient today.
Hey, don't blame me, Standing. I'm all for it. I've never objected.
I'll let you respond to this one as long as it's short and pithy.
It'll be very, very short. And we did allow Erika to take a few minutes extra on her. I mean, we've been easygoing tonight, I think. I think that those, like the curvature that's seen in some of the Naledi bones, the hands, the feet, the flaring hips, the small brain volume, for example. But the thing is, those secondary anatomical features in the Naledi are actually not as unique as some evolutionists would say, because they're also seen in humans. Modern humans can develop curved finger bones due to heavy use in climbing or from habitual tool use, or modern humans with pathologies can have flaring hips, for example, and even the reduced body size. So I think reductive evolution can very well explain Naledi.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Appreciate your
I appreciate it, James.
Your response. You bet. And Caleb, thanks for your super chat, who said, if evolution could be proven true, there wouldn't be a debate.
Is that one for me, perhaps? Maybe.
So.
Do I get a question? I think the very fact, no shade on you, Standing, but I think the very fact that we're still having flat Earth debates speaks volumes about that statement.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Next up, Brandon Ardeline. Thanks for your super chat, who said, what was God thinking when he was coming up with the design for the I don't know how to pronounce this. This is embarrassing. ECH echidna's genitalia.
I think that question's for you, Erika.
Oh no, that's for you, Standing. That one's all you.
Pretty sure that's for you, Standing.
What's wrong with the genitalia?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I want to Google this standing.
It might get you put on a list. I don't know that. I don't know that nomenclature. I don't know what species that is.
Okay.
I'm going to be
Yeah,
embarrassed
It
with the primate.
sometimes known as spiny anteaters.
spiny anteaters. Yeah, if
Do I really have to
you
pull
want
up
to
a
send
picture
us
of
a
this?
source or something more detailed later, we can try and answer it off air. I'm not too
Gotcha.
sure what that is, to be honest with you.
You should know this standing.
I know.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Next.
But Erica, being such an intelligent individual, says she doesn't know either. So
No, I didn't. That's true. I don't. Unfortunately for me, I don't know the Latin names for every single animal.
it
I
sounds
wish
like a
I
good
did.
question, though.
Gotcha. And thanks so much for your super chat from Trip4, who says Erica is the most knowledgeable, eloquent, cordial, and intellectually honest debater on this topic. Standing for Truth also did a good job defending his position.
Wow, and I didn't even pay that person to say that. I would say Erica is definitely one. I've said it before, one of the most, if not the most knowledgeable. I'm going to say evolutionist debater that there is. So that's why I've really enjoyed having 3 debates. You know, sometimes
Standing,
too many debates can be redundant, but with you, there's so much to talk. We can spend one point an entire debate. Like our second
standing,
debate
yeah.
was all on function.
Standing
So.
and I get along really well. We make a good debate duo just because I think we get a good flow going and no one ever talks too much. I really genuinely mean that. I have fun every time we chat.
Gotcha.
Me too. I enjoyed this one.
Thanks so much for your super chat from our dearest friend John Lloyd, who says, quote, "The chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two species is shown by man attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he take up than a woman can attain," unquote. And they say that they're quoting Darwin, Descent, I think Descent of Man, volume 2,
Yes.
327.
Yes. So Darwin, while very intelligent in many different rights, was also somewhat of a victim of his times in many ways. But I did look into his sort of. Someone had mentioned to me that Darwin was like wickedly sexist at one point, and I was like, "Huh, I'd never heard that claim before. I guess I'll look into it." And interestingly enough, if you look into his interactions with both his daughter and other up and coming female scientists, it does somewhat paint a different picture. So I wonder if his mind changed as he aged. But yes, Darwin was a dude in the 1800s. I'm not particularly surprised that he didn't think as highly of women as he did of men. But it's a shame, you know. I don't know. What are you gonna do? Don't meet your heroes.
Gotcha. Zach Brannigan, thanks for your super chat, who says Erica's dedication to educating the misguided is amazing.
I paid
You
him to
know,
say that.
yeah, standing.
Well, they're saying you're misguided.
I know, that's the joke.
Okay,
I
gotcha.
don't.
I paid the wrong person.
Okay.
Yeah, if that's for me, I do want to say that I definitely get the feeling. I think standing is genuinely trying to figure out what's going on. So I don't think you can ever call someone who seeks knowledge misguided.
Very sassy. I like it. And thanks for your super chat, who's from Excalibur, who said, "So much better than some other debater that often comes on the show, and flat earthers. Just saying, quote, 'You are wrong. Stop it. Just stop. You're making stuff up.'" I added some of those. But if you
I need to debate a flat earther.
if you
one day. That'd be
recognize
fun.
those quotes, they say, "With zero evidence, great debate, keep improving modern day debate." Well, all credit to the speakers. The speakers are what makes this channel fun, and as well as you guys all out there watching and engaging. So we appreciate it. And yeah, so that's a compliment to you both, Erica and Standing for Truth.
Very nice. I appreciate it.
Next up,
As do I.
Carmel Crunk. Thanks for your super chat. They're coming at you, Standing. They said,
Oh, no.
"Saying for Truth, what do you think of Christians who confirm evolution?" Or, in other words, say it's true.
Who believe in evolution? I think they're misguided. I mean, salvation itself is obviously based on faith in Jesus Christ. So you don't have to believe in old Earth creation or young Earth creation to be a Christian. But I think that they're giving up a perfectly good Bible for I don't even want to call it a theory, because it definitely doesn't fit in Scripture. Of course, you got to force fit that type of belief into it, but I mean, it's not required for salvation. So I would just say they're misguided in the science aspect of it. So
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Appreciate your super chat from Daniel Baker, who says, Erika, how do you feel when you bring up so much scientific evidence for your argument and creationists only ever counter with, quote, the Bible says blah blah?
You know what? I do have to say, Standing has never responded to me that way, and very frequently our conversations that we have spur me to look into more of something that I didn't know about previously. For instance, our first, or rather our second conversation, he brought up Y chromosomes and the divergence there, and I didn't know. I didn't know the answer. And I'm sure you'll remember I was like, I don't know the, I don't know the answer. But yes, those who do behave like that are missing out on a great conversation. And from my perspective, being someone who finds evolutionary theories so fascinating, I think they're missing out on some really cool science. And I've known some very excellent Christians who, as Standing noted below, they accept evolution just fine. And so I guess that's all I have to say on that.
Very nice. That was very charitable.
good answer. Good answer.
Next up, Serious Startups. Thanks for your super chat. Who said, even though Standing for Truth won, Erika's performance confirms. I can't say it about. I love him. I hope Professor Day is doing okay. It was a wild debate last night. For those of you who tuned in,
I did see that.
That was one to remember. That's for sure.
That was a lot of fun. Caleb, thanks for your super chat. Who said, "Be nice to Standing for Truth, James." All right, I'll take it easy on him.
Because of James, I cry myself to sleep almost every night.
That's very thoughtful. Serious Startups, thanks for your super chat. Who said, this is their second, they said, James just likes to show off his chin. That's kind of you. I don't know. I always felt a little insecure when I was younger because I have this big butt chin. Do you notice that I have this like dimple? It's pretty massive. It's hard not to see it. But thanks. I mean, I don't know if you're making fun of me or not, but I'll take it. All right. Brandon Artolene, thanks for your super chat, who said, when creationists demand an example of a transitional species, why do they ignore lungfish, mud skippers, amphibians, porpoises, platypi, etc.?
I guess that question's for me. Why do we ignore those? I mean, the lungfish, the mud skippers, for example, I believe he just named a bunch of species that are alive and well today. So, I mean, I don't see them transitioning into anything right now. But when it comes to mosaics, when it comes to, I mean, we've talked a little bit about Tiktaalik, for example, which we can elaborate on later. We do predict some mosaics based on the design model, just like we predict nested hierarchical patterns in anatomy, morphology, and physiology and genetics, for example. So we don't deny that some species that God may have created are odd in a way in mosaics, but yeah, I wouldn't say we deny them.
Gotcha. Thanks so much for your super chat from our dearest friend Nathan Artwork. Good to see you again. They said, oh, they're challenging your charitability, Erika. They want to play hardball tonight. So they said, if a person is arguing the wrong information, how are they not misguided?
Because I think that when it comes to being, whether you're misguided or not, rather, that was a bad way of phrasing that sentence. I think intention has to be taken into account. So even though I think Standing is wrong, I think that he makes a solid effort to figure out what's going on. And anytime someone does that, even if I do think perhaps maybe the answers they've come to are incorrect, or I guess you could call that misguided, I certainly don't think that the person themselves is, because I've certainly met a lot this is probably the one of the less charitable things you'll hear me say, but I've certainly met a lot of bad faith actors that I've at least interacted with, and you can usually call them on their cards decently quick into the conversation, and I don't think Standing's like that. So
gotcha. Very kind of you. I mean, I got nothing against him. He's all right. All right. Thanks for your super chat.
You'll have me back on again, James. That's sweet.
He's precious. You know, he's I gotta give. So even though I was heavy-handed moderating tonight, I have to say I actually enjoy it more when I almost have to do that, because I don't think a debater has to be interrupting to be passionate, but it's at least a sign usually of passion, and so we do appreciate that. We got to give
You
you
did good
credit for
moderating,
that.
James. I'll give you credit. You are a great moderator. You did good tonight.
That's kind of you. I appreciate that. However, someone may disagree with you. However, we may have Darth Dawkins back soon. Or as he goes by now, I think the last time I saw it on Discord is Darth Mauling Atheist. Yes.
Oh
So
my god.
Oh
he's
no.
sassy. We love you, Darth, if you're listening. Carmel Crunk,
That
thanks
is
for your
so
super
funny.
chat, said natural selection, and this is a quote, natural selection and belief in God are not only non-contradictory, but they are inextricably linked and harmonious. Quote, Sygart, PhD.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's just stating one mechanism in the bigger picture, natural selection, of course. Natural selection, or better referred to as differential reproduction, keeps a species as strong as it can be. So based on our model of created genetic diversity, mechanisms such as natural selection, mutations even, genetic processes like recombination and gene conversion, these are all important according to our model, and evolution would probably say the exact same thing. Those mechanisms are important overall.
Gotcha.
Seigert's a cool guy. I would like to interject that.
Thanks for your super chat from Serious Startups, who says the chin point was a compliment. Bless your heart. Appreciate that. They said, but you've got to say beta. That was a really wild one last night. Like I said, I'm like, whew, that was something amazing. Okay.
Like I said, one word
Amazing.
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 So thanks for your thanks for your super chat from Dildo Baggins strikes again. I
He's
wonder.
at it again.
I don't know if it's a real name. Like, you think their parents call them that? I don't know. But they said standing for truth is like Saruman. Believing a lie will be your end.
Hey, all I gotta say is I like Lord of the Rings, so.
We
But
have that.
Saruman is the bad guy, so. Oh, go ahead, Erika. Sorry.
No, I was going to say we have that in common. Standing and I have frequently had the discussion on which trilogy is better, Lord of the Rings or The Dark Knight. I've got my hand in on Lord of the Rings, but standing flip flops. You flip flop sometimes.
It's
though.
a tough one. Yeah, I think it's whatever one I most recently watched.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we'll have that debate in the future too. That'll be a good one.
Gotcha. And thanks for your super chat from last one that we've got here. This Nathan Artwork says maybe Erika should get into being a politician.
Oh no! What a giant pass I'm gonna take on that. Thank you. That's very kind of you. But
Not a desired profession, eh?
No, that's not the world for me.
They meant it as a compliment, though. Maybe they meant it as like the world needs more politicians like you.
Oh, listen, whether it's sweet or not, still.
You got it.
No thanks.
So thanks for that. We got to wrap up soon. I'm getting hot in the sauna. It's really warm in here. So I just thought it was funny. Somebody in the live chat, I can't remember who it was, said, "Is James in a sauna? Like a broken sauna?" So we want to say I am, and it's just terribly hot. But yes, thanks so much everybody for being here. The speakers are linked. I am going to get the link from Dapper Dino, which I think it may be in my email as well. Otherwise, I can put it in there from Standing for Truth or Erika. And thanks for your super chat. Again, Dildo Baggins strikes once more saying, James, can I have your babies? Appreciate that. Another one of those 65-year-old postman people. It's like, I'm really big in the U.S. Postal Service. So thanks for that. Then, yes, that after show will be at Dapper Dinos. If anybody else wants to host an after show for this, let me know. Usually, if you see a debate on our upcoming debates within, our YouTube channel page, and you're like, oh, that's one I'd probably love to do an after show for because I know this debater or I love that topic and I know a lot about it. If you shoot me the link beforehand, I can even put your after show link in the description before this stream, the debate actually starts. And we can let people know about that. And so, but yes, thanks so much, folks. Really do appreciate it. It's always fun, and especially thanks to our speakers, though.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Always a blast. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for doing it again, Erika. Round 3 was another one to remember. So Had a good
For
time.
sure, for
Hope
sure.
the audience enjoyed too.
Thanks for that. One last super chat that just came in. Corporal Annan, thanks for your super chat, who said, are you still doing donations for that bone marrow organization? So we definitely mentioned Be the Match. In fact, we are actually, it's Be the Match won't be tomorrow, but tomorrow for the debate on whether or not anti-theism is reasonable, 100% of the super chats will be going for that debate to COVID relief efforts. And so probably Red Cross, but I've got to check around. And we usually try to look at like charity watchdog rankings or ratings just to kind of see that the charity that we're giving to is both transparent and effective with that basically that they're using the funds for what they say they'll actually use them for. So we are, but I do know it'll for sure be one that is giving to COVID relief, and that is tomorrow's debate, which is 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll be going really early tomorrow, about 8 hours earlier than we normally do, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So if you guys want to come on, hang out with us tomorrow for that debate, and that's on our main page. And as I said, 100% of the super chats will be going to that good cause. So thanks so much, everybody. Want to wish you a great night. One last time, I want to mention the speakers are linked in the description so you can hear more from them and keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable.